Are you live now?
I am live now. No one's here yet. You've got to wait for someone to get in. Hang on, I'll just go on here. Don't swear.
I said my name's Koa.
Hi, Diane. This is Koa. This is Paige, my grandkids. That's Diane. See, Diane said hello. Down here. There she is, ducking down. Look at Koa. He can't stop looking at himself.
Come down with me.
There's a monster down there.
What?
Down there. You don't want to go there. That's lava down there.
Oh God!
That's lava.
Get me up here!
Hey, Trace. Good to see you. Tracy's here. Tracy, say hello, guys. Okay, so you said hello?
Prepare for laughter.
Oh, look out. It's going to pull faces. If the wind changes, you'll stay like that. Did you know that?
Do not true! Oh, let me get this job.
Oh, you get poked in the eye, did that hurt? Okay, guys, I'm going to do that Gary Wayne one. The kids are going very soon, but first I... Oh, mate, right in my ear. First I... Yeah, I'm on TV too, yeah. Yeah, look at you. Yeah, that's you. There you are there, look. Calm down, mate. Calm down, you lunatic. Calm down, you lunatic.
Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Fourth Watch.
Okay.
On the Fourth Watch Radio Network. Hope everyone's having a blessed week. Tonight we continue our supernatural excursion into the highly anticipated reptilian species.
Oh, wrong button.
Wrong button. Now it's...
No, I've got to turn it volume on.
People are gonna comment.
Dragon channeling and Lilith, all the way to the real-life Dracula and the Order of the Dragon, and so much in between. This is a proliferating area of research in the New Age culture we live, and tonight we join the conversation. We've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and start the adventure.
Hi, Han.
Submit for the approval.
There's my grandkids.
I don't know who you are, but hi.
Hannah, say hello to Hannah.
How do you say that?
And just say hi, Han. Han, Hannah, H-A-N.
Species Volume 2 with special guest Gary Wayne. Well, it's officially Thursday, and that means it's officially time.
Yeah, Tracy's got really blue eyes. He's such a cutie. And Paige has got big round eyes. They're so cute.
For the Fourth Watch. It is such a blessing to be back with you all, and we've got a great show on tap tonight. If you're a new listener, we're very grateful to have you tuning in, and we want to let you know that there's a brand new show posted every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard. Be sure to head on over to fourthwatchradio.com.
Diane, I'm going to teach them to play guitar when they're a bit older, and harmonica.
That's FOURTHWATCHRADIO.com, fourthwatchradio.com. There you'll find show archives, links to our free mobile apps for Apple and Android devices, links to all of our websites, as well as a donate page that will show multiple ways you can help support the Fourth Watch Ministries. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes if that's your preferred method of listening. A couple quick reminders. Hollow Earth Chronicles is on sale and available in...
Okay, I think this is a bit over the kids' heads. So I was going to play the Kandahar Giant because their mum's coming back from the shop soon and they're going to be going soon. No. He can't help it. You got it. Too far away. So I'll do the Kandahar Giant. So the kids can get interested in that, because it's not too heavy for them. History. I didn't load. Yes, it did. Actually, no, I'll just keep doing the Gary Wayne one. Sorry, kids. Did you just see me? Look, there he is over there, look.
Well, in multiple formats, including DVD and instant HD streaming. You can secure your copy right now at fourthwatchfilms.com. That's fourthwatchfilms, all spelled out, .com. This is a powerful and groundbreaking, high-quality documentary that you won't want to miss. So be sure to get your hands on a copy or stream it today at fourthwatchfilms.com. Also, our mailing address has changed for those who like to send in letters, questions, and support. So be sure to head over to fourthwatchradio.com and click the Support Our Ministry tab, and there you'll find the new mailing address. We are no longer using the Georgia mailing address, so please make note of that. Finally, the Android app is back. So be sure to
She's as bad as me, guys.
download your copy for free in the Google Play Store or follow the link on our website. Now, tonight we welcome back my good friend and fellow researcher, Gary Wayne, as we continue our discussion on the reptilian species. This is a topic that permeates our modern culture in various secret societies, movies, video games, and even cartoons. As we study this area, we find a truly deep and rich history of this bloodline and beliefs surrounding it in nearly every culture in some form or another. I know you've been waiting some time for this episode, as have I. So let's go ahead and welcome back on Gary Wayne of Genesis6Conspiracy.com. Gary, welcome back to the Fourth Watch. How are you tonight?
Doing very good, and so happy to be back to do part 2 of our first conversation. And I think it was probably caught a few people off guard with the depth of detail and connections around the world. And hoping we can do the same thing again tonight.
Absolutely, the reptilians. You hear that word, and it's like horror movie / sci-fi / conspiracy theory. And again, I always had an issue with this. When I used to hear about reptilians years ago, it would bother me. I couldn't really cope with it. I always thought it was just kind of myth. And I would always think, well, that's just a David Icke myth, or David Icke, whatever you want to call him, David Icke, right? Because he was one that really promoted the idea of reptilians. But then I began to study and research, and I said, well, this actually is real. And it changed my view on things. It changed my view on spiritual warfare. And it really gave me a deeper knowledge of Genesis chapter 6. And so, the last thing we did, I know we put a lot of information in a short time, but we've got a lot more information coming right. So, definitely get ready. You may want to take some notes on this one. We're going to dive right back in. And tonight we're picking up on the modern stuff. I want to make some of the modern, obviously we say this is modern, but it's all connected. It's all connected to the ancient stuff. So I'm just mentioning it because there are accounts in the modern world that tie back to these things. And one of those accounts is Dracula. And we've mentioned Dracula before on the program. Several shows actually, he's come in conversation. But his bloodline is still in power today in the United States. I mean, we have the bloodline tied to Dracula all the way up to the presidents of the United States of America. I think we about Obama being directly descended from Dracula. I know Obama is related to direct lineage of
make sure you don't
Dracula
anything, guys,
because
it'll turn off.
So why don't we start off tonight by talking about Dracula, and then we're going to move into some other areas. But what's the myth? Because we're going to get into the history and the pact that took place. But what's the historical myth? Or if you want to tie it all together any way you want, Gary, I'm just going to give the floor to you.
Sure. And just to underscore what you're just saying, with the presidents and bloodlines linking back to Dracula. So there's also another connection in there that the presidents connect back to the Plantagenet dynasty, which is very much connected in with these bloodlines. And secondly, Prince Charles of England is famous, and I put out a posting on it every once in a while, that he claims that his bloodlines go back to Vlad the Impaler, which is who the modern vampire sort of archetype is built on for the vampire. And so there's actually that sort of turning point in history in terms of where there's a whole mythos that is established around Vlad the Impaler and Dracula as we've come to know him, and all of the mythologies and stories and genres that are particularly with Rob
Mate, you got a big book
the
head.
1800s.
Get in front of the camera. What's going on? It's a shark now.
So we can start with Dracula and then work back.
Big shark.
In the ancient times.
Okay,
forward.
by the way, you're going to bite the
Unless
camera,
you
you
say
silly
differently, I
shark.
think we'll start with Dracula. Perfect. Okay, so as I just mentioned, Dracula is based on Vlad the Impaler. And he is
Even though
also
everyone can see you,
son
don't
of
you?
another individual named Vlad as well. And of course, Vladimir in the sort of Slavic locutions is a princely title. And so very much connected to the ancient czars that come out of Russia. So again, we're talking about bloodlines and interconnections here. And so this Vlad the Impaler, he was a very, very interesting character because he was son of a dragon. And when you look at the word Dracula, Dracul means dragon. And when you put the A on the end of it, means son of a
Okay, no more
dragon.
mucking around the camera.
So again, we have this
No more
natural
mucking
sort
around
of
the camera.
allegory that's built into Vlad the Impaler.
So,
And there's an interesting organization that is organized in around 1397 to 1400 called, known by two names. One is called the Sarkani Ron, S-A-R-K-A-N-A-Y, Ron, R-E-N-D, better known as Ordo Draconis. So again, we have this sort of
when you
dragon
go home and have a look at YouTube,
imagery.
We'll
And
see
in
you guys
the
on
last
YouTube.
interview, I went through some of the etymology on
I
dragon,
don't muck around the camera
Dracula,
anymore.
and Dracon and Dracata and all the different variations that it has. But this was an organization that was organized by the Rosicrucians after the fall of the of the Templar organization from the inner organization to the outer organization, which was sort of an occult sort of splitting. That was called the Cutting of the Elms in 1188 at Easter Castle. And so out of that organization, you have the formation of sort of the modern Rose Cross movement. Again, understanding the Templars donned the Rose Cross. And the Rosicrucians are the nobles that were part of the backing of the Templars. And so they were very much in the background and still remain hidden. But they come together to form the Ordo Draconis with Sigismund of Hungary. Sigismund, I don't think I pronounced it quite the first time there. And he is crowned Holy Roman Empire in 1411. And then this organization is established, and this is all very, very important to understand this crossroads of history that we're talking about, where the mythology changes and who Vlad the Impaler was, and then linking that back to Dracula. So they form this new group of all nobles and princes of Europe, and they have a twofold agenda. One is to put the dragon kingships back on the thrones of Europe, and this is after the fall of the Plantagenets in England as well. So they're being pushed back and off the thrones, and the Tudors, the House of Tudor, is now in power in England. And so they're trying to regain their kingships and regain the power they had. They're also organizing to redevelop the pursuits of thought or the development of the seven sacred sciences. And out of this, with a few other organizations and a little more history, in 1660, you get the development of the Royal Society to do the same thing, to develop the seven sacred sciences. And of course, it's the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons that are forming that. On 1439, Vlad III is inducted into the Ordo Draconis by Sigismund. And he is known as Lord Draconis. And we already mentioned he is the son of Vlad, who was known as Dracul. And of course, that's the father, and the son is Dracula. And Vlad III was an interesting individual. He was known as a noble Celt. And that's very, very important to understand who the Celts come from. Although they do branch off into different areas, you do see them popping up as the Scythians and the Sarmatians as they migrate to England, and then the Scythians as they migrate up into Russia and some other locations. But the Scythians, and particularly the Sarmatians, who their name kind of changes, but they're basically three tribes. There's Scythians, there's Sarmatians, and there's the Amazons. The Sarmatians, which are sort of take over at a certain point in history, I think around 100 or 200 AD, as my memory recalls, they were known as the lizard people or the dragon people, and going back to Nephilim and of course that dragon image. And they used to wear armor that had green scales so that they would, actually look like a dragon or a serpent while they were in battle. So he's known as a noble Celt. And he was educated, we're talking about Vlad the Impaler here. He was educated at the mystery school of Solomon in Austria. So again, it's important to understand these connections. And he was an adept of alchemy and also an adept of the starfire culture. And starfire is a legumen or an allegory for the drinking of blood. So again, we see this being connected, and with the blood drinking cult that descends out of the Nephilim, who the Scythians also descend from. And Vlad was an interesting character because he was also affected by sunlight, and because he had an irritation to sunlight, he became a night person or a night operative. And that is an interesting word where that develops out of, which is upier, which I'll come back to maybe a little bit later in the more ancient account of vampires and dragons.
I hate to interrupt you, you're on a roll. Can you spell that real quick? Because when we come back to that, people are going to want to look this up. How do you spell upier?
Sure. Oupire.
This shows up in a popular series on Netflix currently. But we're going to come back to this. I hate to get you off track, Gary. Please take the mic.
Hey, no problem. Interrupt as often as you like to get clarification, because there's a lot of information that we're going to cover today. And this is the tradition of Oberon. And again, I'm just going to mention that quickly right now, and we'll probably come back to it, because Oberon is known for two things. One of the Tuatha De Danann, which is also connected back to Scythia, and also Oberon is king of the fairies in Midsummer's Night Dream by Shakespeare. And of course, his wife is Titania, which is a female Titan or Nephilim. So again, just making some of these connections on some of the things that we'll come back to a little later. And so Vlad, because of his occult training, he drank the blood because he wanted to develop his cognitive abilities and to live longer, sort of again in that old Nephilim tradition. And so we have an individual here that is going to be transformed into the Dracula character, where we see a lot of that coming through in the true sort of mythology or mythos, that he's a night operating vampire, blood sucking, blood drinking. He's pale skinned. He has green eyes generally, and a reddish hair if he's shown with red hair, which is again part of the Tuatha De Danann and Oberon sort of 30s that's mixed in. And he has the teeth of a cobra, which is, again, like the Naga that we talked about last week. The Naga goes back to the word describing cobra in Sanskrit as opposed to snake, which is Sarpa. And also the cobra is the same sort of neck and head dressing around a cobra that the pharaohs had. And again, I mentioned the pursuits of Thoth in the reestablishment of Ordo Draconis going forward. And then what's also interesting about this creation of the transformation of Vlad the Impaler into Dracula is that the insignia for the surviving Dragon Court of Luxembourg emblem was known as the Oribus, or the dragon incurved with a circle and clutching its tail or biting its tail. So again, you have all of this sort of imagery that's floating around who Dracula is. And so this is also then complemented by the fact that by drinking blood, Dracula is becoming immortal. And again, this is an ancient Nephilim tradition that they, once their lives were limited 120 years, as I understand Genesis 6, then they were always trying to create immortality after that and turn to drinking blood. And so this goes all the way back to the antediluvian epoch with that sort of understanding. And it's what the occult and secret societies continue to do today in their secret rituals. A big part of that is blood drinking and a whole bunch of other abominations, but blood drinking, we'll just leave it at that at this point. And so we also have Vlad as being set up as a prince or a royal bloodline, which he is, just as Lord Draconis, or Lord Dracula, as he's known, is a noble in Romania or Transylvania, where the story sort of situates, because he's representing this hidden bloodline in legamin or allegory or figurative language, however you want to call that. And this bloodline, always in the old type of vampires, not necessarily morphing in the last 10 or 15 years on vampires, but...
And guys, this is my daughter, Sarah.
Hi.
She's the mother of these two cute kids. So say hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Don't be embarrassed.
Don't be a what?
Embarrassed.
Oh, yeah, doubt it.
From the Bram Stoker Dracula mythos is the enemy of Christianity. And so you have these two forces that are fighting all of the time.
Ryan said hi, Sarah.
So
Hello.
I think that's probably a good place to stop and let you jump in and see where you want to go.
Whatever
with this
allows
thing here.
you, we'll go
Okay,
up
so
there.
one of the things that kind of sticks out to me about the Dracula story, and I want to say, historically, this guy's real. You know, people can sit back and they can have their opinions and say, well, it's just Hollywood. But this goes far beyond Hollywood, because Hollywood is new compared to Dracula. Dracula goes way back, as you stated. He's a historical person from a historical bloodline, which is still in power. And one thing I want to mention about him, we talk about this blood drinking idea. And the first thing that comes to my mind, Gary, is we have these beliefs that a human being, and I'm going to just kind of tie this into what we know as the modern vampire mythos. We have this thought that you drink the blood of a vampire, or a vampire bites you. You know, there's two main sources that I've heard in my research, and then a human being can go through a transformation process. And of course, Hollywood gets into the idea, and I think that's probably where we get the idea of vampire biting you and turning you. But
this video when I get
you do drink the blood. I've heard accounts of people in the cult who say that they drank the blood of a fallen angel, and maybe even by extension a Nephilim, a modern Nephilim, who knows. But they say that in a ritual that there was bloodletting that took place, and the blood was poured out unto a human, and that by taking in that blood, they entered into a covenant with that being, and they started to be transformed. Now, I guess the concern here is that new research is showing up that
William Snowbellin says the same thing. Remember, he said he drank blood for a long time and become a vampire? He said the same thing, basically.
people that have unprotected sex, the DNA stores, like the man's DNA literally stores in the woman's body. I mean, sometimes forever. So there's a lot of very interesting research that we have in modern science that would show that if you drank someone's blood, or even if they bit you and there's a blood transfer, that there would be that DNA in your system quite possibly for the rest of your life. But how would that actually affect the human being in the ritual? And I know we can probably only speculate on this, and I want to be careful speculating on this because at no point do I want to promote any occult systems that are based on myth. I want to kind of investigate this from a realist perspective, but where do you think this kind of, where does the rubber meet the road with the blood drinking and the DNA transformation. Again, what's your opinion?
Well, it's certainly, there's something there. Again, as you mentioned, we can only speculate. What we do know, though, is, in Genesis, Noah is, advised not to drink blood because he's going to be accounted for his blood. And we know it's also laws in Leviticus. And it's also underlined again in Acts when the Gentiles are brought into the new covenant. They're really only limited about 3 things. And one is eating food polluted by, idols, eating, so obviously in rituals, sexual immorality, which again is connected to what you're saying, and of course the drinking of blood. And strangle, from strangled animals or however they do it. So they believe in the occult that it has the ability to lengthen their lives and it increases their cognitive abilities. And one would think that it has the ability to do that, then it has the ability to not just add on, but I think it probably adds on a change in the DNA because, God limits the DNA and the lifespan to 120 years. So if you're limited and you're going to extend that pretty much, in my understanding, has to do to a reprogramming and rewiring of the DNA, or at least changing it in a manner that it wasn't designed to do, as God does in Genesis 6. So I think there's a definite connection there. And you're right on your other point that this. Now I'm going to back up just a step here. You're on 2 points here. One is that if you go back to Atlantean mythology, and they had these 2 dragons that were guarding the world tree. And of course, the world tree, dragons, Atlantis, this is all part of the occult prehistory. They used to tap the dragons and drink their blood to do the same thing. So when you talk about drinking the blood of an actual descendant of the Nephilim, or who might have those hybrid types of blood and DNA in them, or perhaps a manifestation of a dragon, or perhaps a manifestation of a fallen angel in the physical world, to tap that blood, that again is sort of constitutive, that goes right back into prehistory and their core beliefs. And they just didn't bite the neck to drink the blood. I'm sure they could do that. I think that's more for drama than anything else. But typically they would drink the blood, right? And they would drink it from goblets or skulls, as the Sarmatians used to do. And this is the overlay that goes on to the Grail and the King Arthur tales that were written by writers sponsored by the Knights Templar and the Parisian of the Middle Ages, because the Grail actually goes back to Scythian and Sarmatian mythology again, just as Excalibur does, and that whole idea. So King Arthur is just this overlay, this Christian overlay with a hidden subtext or a fairy tale, where the superficial narrative isn't the real story, it's the meaning underneath. And if you go back into history, I'm going to connect this to the Grail and the drinking here fairly quickly here for you, Justin, and for the audience. But the Grail has a couple of allegories as they believe in these bloodlines and the kingship. So this is another dragon kingship that we're talking about.
I played that one yesterday, I'm sure I did. The other day. Hang on. Go back to it now.
In multiple formats, including DVD and instant HD streaming. You can secure your copy right now at fourthwatchfilms.com. That's fourthwatchfilms, all spelled out, .com. This is a powerful and groundbreaking, high-quality documentary that you won't want to miss. So be sure to get your hands on a copy or stream it today at fourthwatchfilms.com. Also, our mailing address has changed for those who like to send in letters, questions, and support. So be sure to head over to fourthwatchradio.com and click the Support Our Ministry tab, and there you'll find the new mailing address. We are no longer using the Georgia mailing address, so please make note of that. Finally, the Android app is back, so be sure to download your copy for free in the Google Play Store or follow the link from our website. Now, tonight we welcome back my good friend and fellow researcher, Gary Wayne, as we continue our discussion on the reptilian species. This is a topic that permeates our modern culture in various secret societies, movies, video games, and even cartoons. As we study this area, we find a truly deep and rich history of this bloodline and beliefs surrounding it in nearly every culture in some form or another. I know you've been waiting some time for this episode, as have I. So let's go ahead and welcome back on Gary Wayne of Genesis6Conspiracy.com. Gary, welcome back to the Fourth Watch. How are you tonight?
Doing very good, and so happy to be back to do part 2 of our first conversation, and I think it was probably caught a few people off guard with the depth of detail and connections around the world, and hoping we can do the same thing again tonight.
Absolutely. The reptilians. You hear that you hear that word, and it's like horror movie / sci-fi / conspiracy theory. And again, I always had an issue with this. When I used to hear about reptilians years ago, it would bother me. I couldn't really cope with it. I always thought it was just kind of a myth. And I would always think, oh, that's just a David Icke myth, or David Icke, whatever you want to call him, David Icke. Because he was one that really promoted the idea of the reptilians. But then I began to study and research, and I said, wow, this actually is real. And it changed my view on things. It changed my view on spiritual warfare. And it really gave me a deeper knowledge of Genesis chapter 6. And so, the last show we did, I know we put a lot of information in a short time. But we've got a lot more information to cover tonight. So ladies and gentlemen, definitely get ready. You may want to take some notes on this one. We're going to dive right back in. And tonight we're picking up on the more modern stuff. Now, I want to make a point, Gary. Some of the modern, obviously we say this is modern, but it's all connected. It's all connected to the ancient stuff. So I'm just mentioning it because there are accounts in the modern world that tie back to these things. And one of those accounts is Dracula. And we've mentioned Dracula before on the program, several shows actually. He's come into conversation, but his bloodline is still in power today, even in the United States. I mean, we have the bloodline ties of Dracula all the way up into the presidents of the United States of America. And I could be wrong about Obama being directly descended from Dracula, but I know Obama is related distantly to George Bush, and George Bush is in the direct lineage of Dracula or Vlad the Impaler. So why don't we start off tonight by talking about Dracula, and then we're going to move into some other areas. But what's the myth? Because we're going to get into the history and the pact that took place. But what's the historical myth? Or if you want to tie it all together any way you want, Gary, I'm just going to give the floor to you.
Sure. And just to underscore what you're just saying, with the presidents and bloodlines linking back to Dracula. So there's also another connection in there that the presidents connect back to the Plantagenet dynasty, which is very much connected in with these bloodlines. And secondly, Prince Charles of England is famous, and I put out a posting on it every once in a while, that he claims that his bloodlines go back to Vlad the Impaler, which is who the modern vampire sort of archetype is built on for the vampire. And so there's actually that sort of turning point in history in terms of where there's a whole mythos that is established around Vlad the Impaler and Dracula as we've come to know him, and all of the mythologies and stories and genres that have sprung off of that, particularly with Bram Stoker's book in the late 1800s about Dracula and its more ancient connections. So we can start with Dracula and then work back, or we can start in the ancient times and work forward. But unless you say differently, I think we'll start with Dracula.
Perfect.
Okay, so as I just mentioned, Dracula is based on Vlad the Impaler. And he is also a son of another individual named Vlad as well. And of course, Vladimir in the sort of Slavic nations is a princely title. And so very much connected to the ancient czars that come out of Russia. So again, we're talking about bloodlines and interconnections here. And so this Vlad the Impaler, he was a very, very interesting character because he was son of a dragon. And when you look at the word Dracula, Dracul means dragon. And when you put the A on the end of it, it means son of a dragon. So again, we have this natural sort of allegory that's built into Vlad the Impaler. And there's an interesting organization that is organized in around 1397 to 1400 known by two names. One is called the Sarkanay, Sarkanay, Ron, R-E-N-D, better known as Ordo Draconis. So again, we have this sort of dragon imagery, and in the last interview, I went through some of the etymology on dragon and Dracula and Dracon and Drancata and all the different variations that it has. But this was an organization that was organized by the Rosicrucians after the fall of the Templar organization, from the inner organization to the outer organization, which was sort of an occult sort of splitting. That was called the Cutting of the Elms in 1188 at Easter Castle. And so out of that organizations, you have the formations of sort of the modern Rose Cross movement. Again, understanding the Templars donned the Rose Cross. And the Rosicrucians are the nobles that were part of the backing of the Templars. And so they were very much in the background and still remain hidden. But they come together to form the Ordo Draconis with Sigismund of Hungary. Sigismund, I don't think I pronounced it quite the first time there. And he is crowned Holy Roman Empire in 1411. And then this organization is established, and this is all very, very important to understand this crossroads of history that we're talking about, where the mythology changes and who Vlad the Impaler was, and then linking that back to Dracula. So they form this new group of all nobles and princes of Europe, and they have a twofold agenda. One is to put the dragon kingships back on the thrones of Europe. And this is after the fall of the Plantagenets in England as well. So they're being pushed back and off the thrones. And the Tudors, the House of Tudor, is now in power in England. And so they're trying to regain their kingships and regain the power they had. And they're also organizing to redevelop the pursuits of thought, or the development of the 7 sacred sciences. And out of this, with a few other organizations and a little more history, in 1660, you get the development of the Royal Society to do the same thing, to develop the 7 sacred sciences. And of course, it's the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons that are forming that. Now, in 1439, Vlad III is inducted into the Ordo Draconis by Sigismund. And he is known as Lord Draconis. And we already mentioned he is the son of Vlad, who was known as Dracul. And of course, that's the father, and the son is Dracula. And Vlad III was an interesting individual. He was known as a noble Celt. And that's very, very important to understand who the Celts come from. Although they do branch off into different areas, you do see them popping up as the Scythians and the Sarmatians as they migrate to England, and then the Scythians as they migrate up into Russia and some other locations. But the Scythians, and particularly the Sarmatians, who their name kind of changes, but they're basically 3 tribes. There's Scythians, there's Sarmatians, and there's the Amazons. The Sarmatians, which are sort of take over at a certain point in history, I think around 100 or 200 AD, as my memory recalls, they were known as the lizard people or the dragon people, and going back to Nephilim and of course that dragon image. And they used to wear armor that had green scales so that they would, actually look like a dragon or a serpent while they were in battle. So he's known as a noble kill. And he was educated, we're talking about Vlad the Impaler here. He was educated at the Mystery School of Solomon in Austria. So again, it's important to understand these connections. And he was an adept of alchemy and also an adept of the starfire culture. And starfire is a legomen or an allegory for the drinking of blood. So again, we see this being connected. And with the blood drinking cult that descends out of the Nephilim, who the Scythians also descend from. And Vlad was an interesting character because he was also affected by sunlight. And because he had an irritation to sunlight, he became a night person or a night operative. And that is an interesting word where that develops out of, which is Upir, which I'll come back to maybe a little bit later in the more ancient account of vampires and dragons.
I hate to interrupt you. You're on a roll. Can you spell that real quick? Because when we come back to that, people are going to want to look this up. How do you spell Upir?
Sure. Oupire.
This shows up in a popular series on Netflix currently. We're going to come back to this. I hate to get you off track, Gary. Please take the mic.
Hey, no problem. Interrupt as often as you like to get clarification, because there's a lot of information that we're going to cover today. And this is in the tradition of Oberon. And again, I'm just going to mention that quickly right now, and we'll probably come back to it, because Oberon is known for two things. One of the Tuatha De Danann, which is also connected back to Scythia. And also Oberon is king of the fairies in Midsummer's Night Dream by Shakespeare. And of course, his wife is Titania, which is a female Titan or Nephilim. So again, just making some of these connections on some of the things that we'll come back to a little bit later. And so Vlad, because of his occult training, he drank the blood because he wanted to develop his cognitive abilities and to live longer, sort of again in that old Nephilim tradition. And so we have an individual here that is going to be transformed into the Dracula character, where we see a lot of that coming through in the true sort of mythology or mythos, that he's a night operating vampire, blood sucking, blood drinking. He's pale skinned. He has green eyes generally, and a reddish hair if he's shown with red hair, which is again part of the Tuatha De Danann and Oberon sort of heritage that's mixed in. And he has the teeth of a cobra, which is, again, like the Naga that we talked about last week. The Naga goes back to the word describing cobra in Sanskrit as opposed to snake, which is Sarpa. And also the cobra is the same sort of neck and head dressing around a cobra that the pharaohs had. And again, I mentioned the pursuits of Thoth in the reestablishment of Ordo Draconis going forward. And then what's also interesting about this creation of the transformation of Vlad the Impaler into Dracula is that the insignia for the surviving Dragon Court of Luxembourg emblem was known as the Oribus, or the dragon incurved with a circle and clutching its tail or biting its tail. So again, we have all of this sort of imagery that's floating around who Dracula is. And so this is also then complemented by the fact that by drinking blood, Dracula is becoming immortal. And again, this is an ancient Nephilim tradition that they, once their lives were limited 120 years, as I understand Genesis 6, then they were always trying to create immortality after that and turn to drinking blood. And so this goes all the way back to the antediluvian epoch with that sort of understanding. And it's what the occult and secret societies continue to do today in their secret rituals. a big part of that is blood drinking and a whole bunch of other abominations, but blood drinking, we'll just leave it at that at this point. And so we also have Vlad as being set up as a prince or a royal bloodline, which he is, just as Lord Draconis or Lord Dracula, as he's known, is a noble in Romania or Transylvania, where the story sort of situates, because he's representing this hidden bloodline in legamin or allegory or figurative language, however you want to call that. And this bloodline, always in the old type of vampires, not necessarily as it's morphing in the last 10 or 15 years on vampires, but from the Bram Stoker Dracula mythos, is the enemy of Christianity. And so you have these two forces that are fighting all of the time. So I think that's probably a good place to stop and let you jump in and see where you want to go with this from here.
Okay, so one of the things that kind of sticks out to me about the Dracula story, and I want to say, historically, this guy's real. You know, people can sit back and they can have their opinions and say, well, it's just Hollywood. But this goes far beyond Hollywood, because Hollywood is new compared to Dracula. Dracula goes way back, as you've stated. He's a historical person from a historical bloodline, which is still in power. And one thing I want to mention about him, we talk about this blood drinking idea. And the first thing that comes to my mind, Gary, is we have these beliefs that a human being, and I'm going to just kind of tie this into what we know as the modern vampire mythos. We have this thought that you drink the blood of a vampire, or a vampire bites you. You know, there's two main sources that I've heard in my research, and then a human being can go through a transformation process. Now, of course, Hollywood gets into the idea, and I think that's probably where we get the idea of a vampire biting you and turning you, but they do drink the blood, and I've heard accounts of people in the occult who say that they drink the blood of a fallen angel, and maybe even by extension a Nephilim, a modern Nephilim, who knows. But they say that in a ritual that there was bloodletting that took place, and the blood was poured out unto a human, and that by taking in that blood, they entered into a covenant with that being, and they started to be transformed. Now, I guess the concern here is that new research is showing up that people that have unprotected sex, the DNA stores, like the man's DNA literally stores in the woman's body. I mean, it's sometimes forever. So there's a lot of very interesting research that we have in modern science that would show that if you drank someone's blood, or even if they bit you and there was a blood transfer, that there would be that DNA in your system quite possibly for the rest of your life. But how would that actually affect the human being in the ritual? And I know we can probably only speculate on this, and I want to be careful speculating on this, because at no point do I want to promote any occult systems that are based on myth. I want to kind of investigate this from a realist perspective, but where do you think this where does the rubber meet the road with the blood drinking and the DNA transformation? Again, what's your opinion?
Well, it's certainly, there's something there. Again, as you mentioned, we can only speculate. What we do know, though, is, in Genesis, Noah is, advised not to drink blood because he's going to be accounted for his blood. And we know it's also laws in Leviticus. And it's also underlined again in Acts when the Gentiles are brought into the new covenant. They're really only limited about three things. And one is eating food polluted by, idols, eating, so obviously in rituals, sexual immorality, which again is connected to what you're saying, and of course the drinking of blood. And from strangled animals, or however they do it. So they believe in the occult that it has the ability to lengthen their lives and it increases their cognitive abilities. And one would think that it has the ability to do that, then it has the ability to not just add on, but I think it probably adds on a change in the DNA, because, God limits the DNA and the lifespan to 120 years. So if you're limited and you're going to extend that pretty much in my understanding, has to do to a reprogramming and rewiring of the DNA, or at least changing it in a manner that it wasn't designed to do, as God does in Genesis 6. So I think there's a definite connection there. And you're right on your other point that this. Now I'm going to back up just a step here. You're on 2 points here. One is that if you go back to Atlantean mythology, and they had these two dragons that were guarding the world tree. And of course, the world tree, dragons, Atlantis, this is all part of the occult prehistory. They used to tap the dragons and drink their blood to do the same thing. So when you talk about drinking the blood of an actual descendant of the Nephilim, or who might have those hybrid types of blood and DNA in them, or perhaps a manifestation of a dragon, or perhaps a manifestation of a fallen angel in the physical world, to tap that blood, that again is sort of constitutive, that goes right back into prehistory and their core beliefs. And they just didn't bite the neck to drink the blood. I'm sure they could do that. I think that's more for drama than anything else. But typically they would drink the blood, right? And they would drink it from goblets and or skulls, as the Sarmatians used to do. And this is the overlay that goes on to the Grail and the King Arthur tales that were written by writers sponsored by the Knights Templar and the Parisian of the Middle Ages, because the Grail actually goes back to Scythian and Sarmatian mythology again, just as Excalibur does, and that whole idea. So King Arthur is just this overlay, this Christian overlay with a hidden subtext or a fairy tale, where the superficial narrative isn't the real story, it's the meaning underneath. And if you go back into history, I'm going to connect this to the Grail and the drinking here fairly quickly here for you, Justin, and for the audience. But the Grail has a couple of allegories as they believe in these bloodlines and the kingship. So this is another dragon kingship that we're talking about in England, and the whole Camelot dynasty is a bloodline genealogy of the Grail bloodlines that also intermarries into the Merovingian bloodline. But the Grail is known as being an allegory for dragon bloodlines. And in particularly the maternal bloodline of the Grail Queen is the Rosicrucis, and the nectar of the supreme excellence, and also known as Starfire. So again, you got all these other sort of allegories that are interlaced, just as the Grail is thought to be not as we understand it today, which is Sangreal, which is holy or royal chalice, that most people think is the blood that's collected off of the cross by Joseph of Arimathea. It's not that. It's the bloodline of the Nephilim bloodlines, and secondarily their overlay of Jesus and Mary Magdalene's bloodline that marries into the Camelot dynasties. But the word Graal goes back to an ancient word called Graal, Graal, and that was a chalice or cauldron of Sumeria where blood was drank from. So very similar sort of ideology to what the Scythians, which of course Dracula was a noble Celt, just as the Tuatha De Danann, and just as the Camelot dynasties come out of the Tuatha De Danann. It was also known as another Legomin allegory as Sangreal, that's Sangreal, or holy or royal bloodline, as it is known by that spelling, or Sanreal, Sanreal, or holy or royal blood. And again, this is all very, very, very important to understand, that this blood drinking aspect has been maintained and kept as part of the bloodlines, as part of the genealogies, and part of the occult ritual all the way through history. And of course, the original Grail Queen in the occult is Lilith, who I'll connect in by more definitions probably in a few minutes as we sort of get to it. And she was the matrilineal inheritance of Malkuth, or the Grail Queen of the antediluvian epoch. So as you can see, where all of this is heading is just an ongoing mythos of genealogies and occult history.
And we see that no matter what area of history that we approach, we're going to find that all of these different myths that have just surfaced. And it's like we know more now with modern technology. But with our technology, we can pull up all these myths, and we can get down, I mean, even to origin points. And we find out that it's like every occult culture of the world practically continues these practices from thousands of years ago all the way up until modern day. It doesn't matter where the origin point is. We see the same occult behavior when it comes to blood drinking.
Exactly. And it even goes back to a connection with Cain. And as I mentioned before, the word starfire, it's also known as the divine menstruum, because a lot of times it's mixed with the menstruum of a goddess or somebody of a hybrid royal bloodline for drinking. And this was believed in their occult belief system, was considered a noble supplement only for the royal bloodlines to help keep them superior. And it's also known under the starfire understanding as the lunar essence of the dragon queen from the female menstruum. And in this long line of allegory and symbolism, you see Cain sometimes spelt with a Q as it comes out of ancient languages. And Q-A-Y-N would be the typical one for Cain. And of course, that's the variation that the occultists particularly like to use for Cain, because that connects right back to Cain, who they believe was a Nephilim king in the serpent seed bloodline. And again, I know there's a lot of Christians that believe in the serpent seed through Cain, but this is also an occultic Gnostic constitutive doctrine. And so he starts the first line of Nephilim kings in that sort of belief system.
Now, we just for the record, and I think we may have said this in the first show we did on this, neither you or I or the Fourth Watch Network, we don't support the view that Cain was a Nephilim. I just want to make that clear to everybody. I believe it can be disproven with scripture in like 3 minutes.
Well, yeah, you have to bring in allegory and insert that allegory to usurp the literal meaning of the rest of the narrative there. And I do recognize that Cain sounds like the word acquired as you take that back to Hebrew. But clearly it says in most translations that, Adam, lays with Eve and they have Cain, although I know there is an alternative translation there that says acquired as well, but that connection is so tenuous that you have to force every other thing that people are going to use in reference to support the theory. And I think it's an interesting theory. I don't think it's needed. And it's certainly not, there's no smoking gun in the Bible that says that it's true. And then the other thing that is the red flag, as you mentioned, it is constitutive in the Gnostic religion that Cain was a Nephilim and son of Cain or son of other angels that raped Eve, or and I think we mentioned this in the last show as well.
Hi, Alan. Welcome to the channel, mate.
Or as the son of Lilith.
And I agree with everything you just said.
Satan, who they give to Adam and Eve to raise. And so that sort of leads me back to where I let off with the Lilith. And I'm going to finish up on a little bit with Lilith, but I'm going to
link back, good to see you.
First through what I talked about with Oberon, back to Lilith, and back to vampires and ancient witches. So Oberon, as we talked about, derives from the king of the fairies, or the Albigens of the Elven fairy bloodline, as it's known in the Gnostic religions, particularly coming out of the Albigesenians and the Cathars, who are the Templars. And
thanks, Roy. I didn't see you come in. Yeah, they're really great kids, and They really love coming up here and spending time with their pop. It was a great 3 days.
The Crucians are all intermixed with. I mean, Southwest France was the center for rebellion, which brought on the Inquisition by the Catholic Church. Not that I'm supporting what the Catholic Church did, but they actually were rising to the power level of Catholicism, and they believe that they have evidence that would bring down the Catholic Church. So these two powers have been arguing for a long time. Let's just leave it at that, not get too far down that rabbit hole. And so Oberon is the king of the fairies, and Oberon derives from the Teutonic Ober, O-B-E-R, which is Aryan, which is again part of the mix of Nephilim survival and occult sort of history. And the name of that is Ubar, U-B-A-R, which is the Scythian Sarmatian word Uper, and which again gets translated over time into the Tuatha De Danann and the Celtic language as Ober. And when you look at the Overlord, which the
Paul Begley just went live, so we're going to wait for Mike from around the world to show up.
The Pendragons were, and the Tuatha De Danann were known at.
It's the same time every week, so it's another hour and a half before he shows up. No, an hour and a quarter.
And sort of that Celtic sort of lordship, they're known as an overlord or overreign, O-V-E-R-R-E-I-G-N, which is the same as overlord and which is transliterated as Oberon. So you see all of this bloodline and stuff intermixed with Oberon, the king of the fairies in Midsummer's Night Dream, and of course who's married to Titania, the name of an Nephilim. Now, the word Uper, U-P-E-R, is an important Tuatha De Danann fairy title deriving from the Scythian Sarmatian Upiers. And that's the tradition. The Upier is the tradition of the ancient vampire. Now, the Scythian and the Sarmatians, as I mentioned, were the snake people clans that migrated from northwest Turkey as part of Scythia and Sarmatia, who they believe that they descend from Aryans, who they believe are Atlanteans. Okay, and the Nephilim that they descend from are names like Kelties and Scythes and Albion and Gog and a few other names that go. I think there's another one that's very close to. I think Galades is it, which is again very similar to the sort of Galatian name. But anyways, all in this northwest Turkey area where they escaped out of Tartarus after the flood to repopulate the earth. And how they arrive at that is in the Titan rebellion. You have the Titans who rebel against the gods, being imprisoned in Tartarus. And they escape after the flood to repopulate. They go down into the Middle East, as that belief goes, up into the north, into Russia, into Germany, into Norway, to become the sort of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan strain descending from Titans. And then the other strain migrates to England and to Ireland to become the red-haired, green-eyed strain of these giants and pale skin. And so as we move this sort of back into history and understanding that Vladimir or Vlad is a princely title of the Slavic people who descend from the Scythians out of northwest Turkey, understand that the word strigoi is Romanian for a witch or a vampire, and popular as a word using for a vampire as it comes out of Romanian. And of course, the Latin word for strigoi is strix, S-T-R-I-X, meaning screech owl. And
wow, I don't remember what his new book's about, but he does say it's much better than the first one. And the first Genesis 6 Conspiracy was a stunning book with 96 chapters. So apparently this one's going to be better. I think it's about the prophecies and what's coming true now. I'm not sure though.
Of course, vampires are night witches and upiers, and oberons, as all of these words and etymology starts to tie back.
Screech owl, I just want to say this real quick. I don't want to get you off track, but screech owl shows up in the Bible.
Isaiah 34, 15 to 17, right? And so let's just finish off with this. So Lilith is known as a night demon and who lives amongst screech owls. And Lilith is Lith, is the Hebrew word for screech owl. And it hopped on one foot like a goat. And this is very similar and connected to the word Lamia. And that's a blood-sucking demon known as a female Upier, or female vampire. And Lilith is known as a Lamia. And a Lamia flew at night like a screech owl in Greek mythology. And
it's already out too, Why? I think Diane posted that he was on a show last night and gave away 5 copies of the book. So it must be already done.
The killer of infants and of child sacrifice, just as we know Lilith coming out of Sumerian and Hebrew prehistory through legends and outside the Bible sources. And Lilith held, as we mentioned, the matrilinear or the matriarchal inheritance of Malkuth, which she inherited from, guess what? Tiamat. Queen Tiamat, which is also the same word that transliterates out of Sumerian mythology and Mesopotamian mythology, whether it's Lotan or the many other names, for a being that we know as Leviathan, which is this great dragon. And I think we mentioned also Tiamat in the last show created the crab, which were the scorpion-like beasts that helped guard the gods that are, I guess that was a Freudian slip, gods that come out of the abyss in Revelation 9. But anyways, pretty accurate. And so Lilith held the rings of the kingship, which is part of the ring lord allegory that goes into Lord of the Rings. And Lilith, as I mentioned earlier, was an allegory for a screech owl. And that word goes back to, in the Bible out of Isaiah, if you take that back, goes back to a screech owl, Lilith. And of course, Lilith is also part of the allegory that gets woven into the fairy bloodline, the matriarchal bloodline we talked about in the Grail, because she is part of the whole allegory of the Dulac family, which is of the water, and the fairies that guard the portals in the waters, the ladies of the lake, right? This is an allegory that goes back to the fleur-de-lis, which is an allegory for Lilith.
So if I'm not mistaken here, you're mentioning there's a connection to the fleur-de-lis and Lilith. Now the fleur-de-lis, we see it on the Saints, the football team, the Saints. We see it all over New Orleans. It's a very, very popular symbol in French history, if I'm not mistaken. The symbol fleur-de-lis, that's actually directly connected to Lilith?
Yeah, because it's a lily. And all things with lilies in the occult connect back to Lilith as one of the very, very close to founding matriarchal bloodlines of the Nephilim. And when we look at where else we might see the fleur-de-lis, I mean, you have it on the French kingship. Okay, that's fine. Those are the bloodlines of the Nephilim as they come through many of the French kingships. But it's also the emblem of the priory of Sion, just as the rose is. And just as the rose is also synonymous with the Grail. All of these allegories and symbols all connect back.
And we're going back to dragons here. Like there's these connections here. I want to just be point blank and ask you a question, and people can agree or disagree. That's fine. But from your perspective, do you believe the dragons, and I say plural, but the dragons in general, the real dragons, and we're going to get into this here in just in a few minutes, hopefully. But do you believe that the dragons are direct connections with the entities that we know as the fallen angels?
Yes. but in a couple of different directions. Certainly, if you take a seraphim angel who has a face like a viper or a snake, and you put wings on it, you have a flying dragon. And in antiquity, as we mentioned in the last show, dragons and serpents were considered the same physical animal in the world. So if you had the serpent in Eden who, taught, was intelligent, walked on 2 feet, had hands, one can imagine there was probably ones that had wings as well that would also be part of that flying dragon imagery. So I think all of that, whether it's Nakash or it goes back to Seraph or Seraphim, all of that derives from the understanding that these were a snake-like being and they reproduced, and they may can't say for sure whether or not the serpents of Eden somehow survived and aren't crawling on the belly, but perhaps some fallen angels found a way to save them, but we have nothing scriptural on that. But we do have the descendants of the Nephilim as they come out of Genesis 6, and the creation from the seraphim angels is continuing on that sort of reptilian lineage. So, yeah, the question is do I think dragons are directly related to fallen angels and rebellion? Absolutely. Because even in Leviathan and all of the different accounts around the world during the creation of the earth, you have this rebellion that's going on with these serpent-like beings of creation.
And in this dragon research, we find that there are people today who communicate with dragons. Now, I know this sounds crazy to some people. It sounded crazy to me. But there are people who believe that dragons are extra-dimensional or interdimensional entities that, even though we don't see them, they're still existing on our plane. And there are people out there who literally, they will channel and communicate with these entities.
When people think that they're talking with dragons, whatever they are that they're talking to, we'll talk about that in detail in a second, is if they're talking to a seraphim or a naga, they may believe they're talking to a dragon.
This takes me back on a personal journey that I was on. I was actually a personal trainer years ago, and my boss, who was also a personal trainer, really nice guy. And I want to go ahead and get it out there that even though I expose the occult and the wickedness in the world on a regular basis, it doesn't mean that I hate people that practice these things. It's kind of like with homosexuality. I disagree with it. I believe it's biblically wrong, but I don't hate the people. And, this guy did not claim to be a Christian. And so I had an open opportunity to get to know him and talk about the gospel. And he invited me over to his home, and I went. And he was so excited to take me up into his ritual room. And I tell you, Gary, I didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go, but I said, okay. I didn't want to offend him. He was, I was his guest. And so I'm praying in my spirit as we walk up into the ritual room, and we get up in there, and it's a full-blown library of occult books and all types of talismans and different, we'll just say different tools for his craft. And he was explaining to me, he pulls a book off the shelf, and it's a book on dragons. And what was really weird about this is that he's showing me how dragons throughout history have existed with man. They've coexisted, and they've been like gods to man. And I'm not going to go into detail here because there's blasphemy involved. And I remember reading some passages in the book, and I was like, wow, this is just crazy. And he said, yeah, we've opened our house up to dragons. And I'm like, okay, well, that's really interesting. And he said, you got to be careful where you step because they're interdimensional. They're spirit beings. He says they can literally manifest physically, or they basically exist invisibly to our eye, but they still communicate with him. And so I really wanted to get out of the house. I was ready to leave about that time, and I didn't stay much longer. But when he explained this to me, and when I was talking to you before the show, Gary, and you mentioned to me that, yes, that these things could fall into the category of an entity that would be a changeling, that if they did appear, they could take on that form, or they could just, be a spiritual entity that's communicating back and forth, telepathically with these people. So, I didn't want to throw too much of a curveball at you, but that's why I brought it up before the show.
What we do know is they all sort of relate this back to this watcher sort of ideology that they've been watching humankind and our development over the millennia, and that this is like the celestial masters, or as I like to call them, the celestial mafia, or the great white brotherhood, right? This is all part of Eastern Buddhism. It's part of New Age. It's part of Rosicrucianism, that they're talking to these spiritual guides, masters, and there's probably different orders of the ones that they're talking to, right? So not all the angels were imprisoned in the abyss, only the impassioned ones as we understand it. So that means there's a whole host of angels that rebelled that aren't in the abyss, but are still in a state of rebellion. And so they may be following whatever guidelines not to be put into the abyss, but they're still out there. And there could be a great number of them out there, because if we understand in Revelation that there's the 100 million angels that were created, 10,000 times 10,000, as I recall the quote, and then in Revelation 12, a third of them either rebelled or will have rebelled by the end time, that leaves 33 million. So there's quite a few that are still probably out there in behind the scenes directing probably the demon spirits of the Nephilim who no longer have bodies. So I think they're creating delusions in all sort of aspects. But as you get into meditation and trances and occult rituals and start to communicate, you're communicating with a whole host of these that are guiding these occult societies.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. One of the questions that would come into play here in dealing with, and I'll just use Dracula for one example here, going back before he was born, are we dealing with, from your research or even your opinion on the matter, are we dealing with a guy who was already in a Nephilim bloodline before he went through his pact, his blood pact or his blood ritual? Do you believe that he was already part of this lineage?
Yeah, he takes his lineage back to the Scythians as well. So you have this royal bloodline that connects themselves right back to the same people that the descendants of Japheth intermarry with. And I think take some of the names, as particularly Gog and Magog, because those are both names of giants and titans out of Greek mythology. And I think they intermarry with them. And so they believe that their bloodline, yes, goes back to these titans who escaped out of Tartarus.
So he was already a reptilian in nature, but I'm going to use the term sleeping giant per se. He's basically a sleeping giant reptilian, and then he goes through this ritual, and it awakens those things, and then it takes him to another level to where he's able to do things that the average human would not be able to do.
Yeah, that's basically the understanding. And of course, it's trying to bring back that godlike quality that the demigods or the Nephilim had. So it may be as much as a mythos dream as actual physical superiority, but we don't know. I mean, we don't know, because once you get into a certain level of the occult societies, I mean, it's an iron door, and secrets just don't get out. But they continue to drink blood because they believe it does lengthen their lives. They believe it does make them more superior with their cognitive abilities. But again, we don't know. So we can only speculate that that's the case. But certainly in the past, I mean, who they take all of their allegories from, you are pretty much reflective of their belief system. But again, it's heavily encoded with genealogies and things like that, with the metaphors and stuff. So you have to be a little bit careful with that as well.
Absolutely. We know that so much has been passed down from these historical accounts. So many cultures around the world have gripped onto these things. They've literally held them close as if it was gospel in their religious groups. And they reference back to these people, they reference back to these entities, and they believe with all their heart that this really did happen exactly like they believe. And one thing we find with so much myth is that there's generally a decent amount of truth inside of the myth, but they're taking a different view than we would take as Christians. And I think that's kind of like, we see that throughout the entire Hollow Earth research that I've been doing over the last few years. It's like these things line up with scripture, but they're the opposite view. These people are on the wrong side of the spectrum, and so they're looking at these things as if they are good, and in their quest for knowledge and in their quest for power or their quest for godliness, because their understanding of godliness is the absolute opposite of our understanding of godliness. So I think it's important to understand where they're coming from and what they believe. Now, the idea of Transylvania, people can go to Transylvania even today, and they've got castles, ancient castles that are set up over there. As a matter of fact, I saw a TV show years ago where some young men went over to the actual castle that was at least advertised as the Castle of Dracula. Now, it's kind of odd to think that people would want to go experience this, this location. The first thing that comes to my mind is what Paul wrote about in Ephesians about, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but we're actually wrestling with principalities. And I would imagine that to go into a location like Transylvania with so much bloody history and occult history, there would be some pretty large-scale principality issues going on over there.
Oh, I would think so. I think there's collections of evil that remain around the world, and I think you're going to get a very large sense that there's evil when you go through those areas, because it just houses that ancient knowledge and that ancient mythology as what they believe. So I think yeah, you would get that sense.
Now, what do you know about the movement, this whole vampire movement, or and I hate to use that terminology because that's kind of what we call it today, but what would you say is going on in Transylvania today? I mean, is there still this lineage that has their roots in the ground over there, that they're still practicing the blood drinking?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, again, if you buy into the understanding that the royal families are these Nephilim bloodlines, and that people like the Windsors take their lineage back to Vlad the Impaler, then and understand that blood drinking is part of secret society ritual and occultic religious ritual, and is still done at the high levels, and that these are all part of the same organization, then yeah, it makes sense that it's done on a fairly regular basis. And I think people underestimate how strongly the spurious forces believe in their religion and the rituals and the things that they do, because they are in contact, as you've mentioned and I talked about, with their gods in the spiritual realm, no matter how they present themselves to them. And so they're always paying homage to them today. And these royal bloodlines go around the world. And, I did a posting out on Vladimir Putin. And again, same name that, Vlad the Impaler has. It goes back to that princely title. Yet Vladimir Putin's bloodline only goes back to his grandfather, and it's mysteriously, there's nothing there before. But typically what would happen with the princes of Russia, if they were to have a child outside of wedlock, they would give it a shortened version name. And in the area...
Okay, Diane, if that's 15 months old, they would have fixed the defects in the other ones by now. The fact they're still happening, I wonder what it means, though. Does it help 5G? Does it trigger the vax like someone suggested? Who knows? Certainly curious.
Where in the Tver region, TVER, where Putin comes from, there's the Putlanin, or Putyanin, as there's two different ways of spelling that name. And Putin isn't a family name in the history of family names in Russia. It comes out of nowhere in the middle 1800s. And there's only one branch that's left today because his two brothers died, so he's the only one. The Putyanin, they go back to the original czars and Vladimir, Prince Vladimir of the czars out of the Tver and the Ukraine region, who are the direct descendants of the Scythians. So you have these bloodlines and people out of these bloodlines holding power not only in Russia today, if that indeed is the connection, because again, there's nothing to connect that other than sort of the dots I've connected there. But if you go into anywhere around the world, I mean, one of the mistakes that people think is that the collection of the Nephilim bloodlines are only the ones from the Batalic dynasties out of Daniel that ended up populating the European monarchies. this is a worldwide thing in terms of the genealogies of the Nephilim. And so if you go into India, you have the Singh family that goes back into secret society history and goes back into Indian royal families and back to the Aryans. And you've got the Li family out of China that goes back to the sovereign empires and the dragon sovereign empires that we touched on briefly last year. And these are the royal bloodlines that are in power today, because Li is president of China today. And the Li name is all over Southeast Asia that has ruled governments and kingships, just as they spawned the Yamamoto dynasty in, depending on whether you want to take it to 600 BC or 200 BC. There's no real formal records behind 200 BC, but they descend from the Li dynasty. And just as when you get into Central and South America, most people think that the Spaniards wiped out all of the royal bloodlines of the princes of the various Quiché Maya, the Mixtec, the Toltec, the Inca, and on and on and on, of all these different families and the Aztecs. They didn't. They just killed the existing king at that time. But the royal family survived, and within a generation, they were intermarrying with the Spanish and Portugal nobility, and these families were set back, or not set back, but were re-given their nobility titles. And of course, that came with the intermarriage. So this whole bloodline thing is around the world. And if somebody doesn't think that they're not interconnected and they don't follow their ancient beliefs, I think that's a bit naive.
It is.
But just my opinion.
It is. And, one of the things that sticks out to me is that in different cultures of the world, you've got the average layperson. I mean, just literally, I mean, we'll just say the average pauper in society, the lower level people who have no direct connections to, we'll say, high ranking occult magic. But in their culture, it's been kind of bathed upon them that it's okay to drink blood. And now they're not out drinking human blood on the low level, but they do. It's very popular. My dad was on a mission trip into China, and they're out in the countryside. Anybody who's been to China, you know that there are so much countryside out there. I mean, you could take trains, over 24 hours out into the countryside, and you get out there, and there's people literally living off the grid, and they're staying at this guy's house, and they take a chicken, they strangle the chicken, they cut the head off, and then they literally drain the entire amount of blood from the chicken into a bowl. And the wife starts doing something to it, and it starts to kind of thicken up on top. And this is a dish that they believe is a delicacy. Like, they would do this, and it's a very special delicacy. And my dad was with some of the missionaries, and they saw what was going on, and their interpreter told him that it was against their belief, that they had taken a vow. If I'm getting the story correct, they had taken a vow in their religion to not drink blood, but they honored my dad and his friends. They didn't have to drink the blood. But it was, this guy was not some major occultist. This has been taught to them in their culture, that there are special benefits of drinking blood and eating the blood. As I said, it thickens up a little bit, almost into like a pudding or something.
Yeah, well, you were mentioning, and at China, they no longer do it for the most part, at least in public or in public restaurants. But they used to serve, and I did travel in China, so I know this. I missed the meal because I picked up a bacteria, fortunately, but they went out to eat snake that night, which is quite appropriate to what we're talking about today in terms of the reptilians and the snakes and everything. But beforehand, they served what looked like a tomato soup. And as my counterparts that were traveling with me were eating it, they said, "This is very interesting tomato soup." And, the host, one of the hosts spoke up and said, "We don't have tomatoes in China. We have to import those, so we don't make tomato soup. That's the blood of the snake you're eating."
Oh,
so those traditions are still out there, and in ways, as you mentioned, that people don't normally think about it as well.
Yeah, they don't understand that the history of this is occultic. But I do want to make a point here. There's a TV show that's on Netflix, and if you know what it is, ladies and gentlemen, you'll know by what I'm talking about. I don't even want to mention the name because I don't want to recommend it. And in the past, you know how it is, Gary. I'll say I watched this show or that show for research, and then I get emails from people criticizing me. Well, how dare you watch that? You know, I have to keep up with what the media is teaching people because, you know, we're watchmen. We want to warn people about things. Right. And we believe that TV shows and movies are telegraphing literally the truth out to people. They're putting bits of truth out there. Yeah. And it's conditioning. It's all pre-programmed. You know, the Illuminati will telegraph their punches. If you're not familiar with this term, folks, just Google it. But this particular TV show, we find out that one of the main characters is an Alpier. I mean, he is. That they use that word in the show. And he looks like a human, and he comes from a very strange royal bloodline, and his family is in charge of this town. And his mother is the same. You know, he's got a freak for a sister. We don't know what she is exactly. But he has these moments where he gets really hungry for blood and he transforms. His teeth kind of come out like needles, kind of like the Naga. And he not only drinks the blood, but he eats the flesh of humans. Like we see him in a couple situations where he doesn't just drink, but he's eating the flesh. And, you know, Steve Quayle in the deleted scene for the Hollow Earth movie, we put the deleted scene out on YouTube. He makes a statement that cannibalism it's literally resurfacing in our modern world. It's resurfacing as a very popular practice. And he literally said that we're going to be seeing more and more of this. And as crazy as it sounded, I hadn't heard much about it. But the months that would follow, Gary, I started hearing reports on different international news sites where cannibalism is now happening in the Muslim world. I mean, we're seeing it in multiple cultures that they're cannibalizing people. I know it's very popular in Africa and other places, but the idea of the whole cannibal thing, it's not just eating the flesh of humans, but it's also taking in the blood of humans. And I wanted to see if you have any connections for the cannibalism. I mean, we know that cannibalism goes back to the Nephilim, that they would devour the flesh of humans.
Well, it's as in the days of Noah, that's what Nephilim did. And again, we don't get that necessarily out of the Bible other than the laws that, you know, are laid down in the law with the Israelites by God. But if you go into the book of Enoch, the Nephilim turned on humankind. And not only did they drink their blood, they consumed human beings en masse. And I think that's what, you know, we're going to see more of that in the end time.
Now, one of the other things
in the days.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, underline, as in the days of Noah.
It really is. And I think that people like to kind of close that scripture off. They try to say, well, I mean, you know, they say, well, it's just basically people are going to be not expecting the judgment of God. They're going to be getting married. And granted, that is part of it because that's part of what took place in the days of Noah. But we can't discount the fact that we are seeing a revival of the days of Noah, far beyond people running around, you know, blind to the judgment that's coming. There's so many more tidbits in there that we study the days of Noah and we're like, wow, we are living in the revived days of Noah. It's so much deeper than that. And the average person, we get accused all the time. I don't know if you do, Gary, but I get accused semi-regularly by the Sethites, people who believe that Genesis 6 is all about the lineage of Seth, which were godly people, by the way. They were godly. Seth was a godly son of Adam and Eve. They say that Seth, it was his descendants that were the fathers of the Nephilim. Well, that's complete garbage. That holds no water whatsoever. You can't prove this with scripture. Matter of fact, you can disprove it with scripture. If they were a godly lineage, how in the world would they be fathering cursed giant entities? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But, you know, it's like a house of cards. Their systematic theology, you pull one card out and it crumbles. And so we know that it wasn't Seth and his lineage that created the Nephilim. We know this. But many people accuse us of going to Gnostic beliefs because we teach the Nephilim, the true angel view of the Nephilim. And so people always like to say, well, you're going back to the Gnostic stuff. Well, no, we're showing that the Gnostics believed it, but the Bible teaches it too. You know, we're showing both sides of it. But there are so many things going on today that are clearly linked to the days of Noah. And I think that a true biblical researcher is going to be able to see these things. And I truly hope that the people that don't see these things, I hope and I pray that their eyes be opened, because I think that they're going to be at a major disadvantage in the last days. You know, if the Lord tarries and we have to live another 100 years or 1,000 years on this earth, people who don't know the truth about these things, they're going to be shocked when more becomes unveiled to the common eye. But I want to also mention the idea of when you're eating the flesh and drinking the blood, I recently read a show last week about some of these Catholic miracles that are documented in the official Catholic encyclopedias. And, I'm not really sympathetic to Catholicism, although I do know that there's some good people that do practice Catholicism. But there are miracles that they've documented that the Vatican has approved where they say that their Eucharist wafer has actually transformed into cardiac flesh tissue. And they've had it tested. It's been validated by the Vatican, and they have printed it in their official encyclopedias. And they also say that the wine has actually turned into blood. And this is very interesting because in the Eucharist, the Eucharist, ritual, they believe that you're actually eating the flesh and drinking the actual blood of Christ. And I can't help but to see this. I mean, I do believe it's a major perversion of what we would call the Lord's Supper, or doing this in remembrance of Christ. But the idea of Catholics believing they're actually eating the actual flesh and drinking the actual blood of Jesus, I have to kind of draw the parallel back to what we've been talking about of eating flesh, cannibalizing, and drinking blood.
Well, you can see that coming into enforced ritual worship if you buy into the fact that Rome is the city of the universal religion, and Catholicism will be completely turned around to start the universal religion, and then they'll change doctrine completely, which our current Pope is currently doing. And you can see that meaning of the Eucharist will distinctly change to that ancient ritual of eating flesh and blood. You can see that happening.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to say this. There's a lot of Catholics out there right now who have stood up against this Pope. And not just this Pope, but even the last Pope. There are Catholics out there that are very conservative in their beliefs. They may not partake in all the paganistic rituals of Catholicism, but they will always call themselves Catholic because that's how they've been raised. And, just like not all Baptists are going to heaven, not all Catholics are going to hell. And look, people, you can write me and criticize me for saying this, but I know people who call themselves Catholic who they know the real Jesus. They do not worship Mary. They do not worship saints. They're very solid in their faith, but they will always call themselves Catholics. And you can call it, ignorance if you want. I don't care what you want to call it. But there are people out there who have stood up against the Vatican, and they have literally separated themselves from the modern Catholic faith in lieu of certain events that have happened. So I think more people will be waking up.
I do question the leadership of the Roman Church, and I think, from my understanding of prophecy, that they do play a way in helping to turn and destroy Christianity, first from within inside Catholicism, and then it spreads to the rest of Christianity and then to the rest of the world for the Universal Church of Babylon. But that's just my understanding of prophecy.
I've known Catholics in my life that they knew the gospel just as well as I did, and they saw the flaws in the Catholic Church. They said, it's not biblical to pray to Mary, it's not biblical to pray to the saints. And that's kind of like us as Christians finding things in our churches that aren't biblical. There's things that we see things on Sunday at some churches. We're like, that's not biblical. I'm not going to support that. I'm still going to call myself a Christian. Just like some Catholics say, I'm still going to call myself a Catholic, but they stand up and in their personal faith, they don't follow those practices. So, a dear friend of mine that I grew up with in Texas, and I'm not going to say his name. I don't want to embarrass him, but he told me that he really disagrees with some of these practices of the Catholic Church. But he's always wanted to call himself a Catholic because that's what he's always, he's been raised to call himself that. And, and I love him dearly. And he told me recently that with all the things that the Vatican is coming out with publicly and currently, he's had to separate himself. And he says, I can't call myself a Catholic anymore if I'm going to be painted with that brush. And I'm like, wow, I never thought I would live to see the day that you said these words to me. And we used to joke about Catholicism back and forth, but, I don't want to joke with him anymore because it's personal for him now, but, we're living in those days. I think people of all religions are going to be waking up to the true gospel. That's my prayer. The Bible says that the harvest is plentiful. Jesus said this, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. There are so many people out there that are going to be accepting the gospel, and we need to be praying for more laborers to share the real gospel. Because religion in and of itself that we see in our modern world, under every type of name, it generally pulls people away from the truth of Scripture. even Christian denominations are chipping away at the true foundations of Scripture. And so it's important that we understand the gospel that the Bible presents, not the gospel that these religions are trying to twist. So again, I call myself just a Bible-believing follower of Christ. I have no problem calling myself a Christian. I don't care what the church is doing. I'm still going to call myself a Christian because I believe I know I'm a follower of Christ. And as a Christian, we don't want to take part in any parts of these things. The blood drinking, these rituals, we don't want to take part in any type of magic or New Age mysticism. That's why we expose what we're exposing here. Now, I'm going to go on a rant. I'm sorry about that. Let me draw us back to the topic, Gary. I know we're almost out of time. Getting back into the idea of these Alpiers. Many people believe that these are still currently living among us today, that they are continuing in these rituals. Interestingly, most of our presidents that we've ever had in the United States have been Freemasons. And if they haven't been Freemasons, they've been part of even more sinister societies, far deeper than Freemasonry goes. But we know for a fact that when you become a 32nd degree Freemason, on record, unequivocally, this can be proven, that you go through a ritual, as you would every degree of Freemasonry. You go through a new ritual, you learn more secrets. But at the 32nd degree ritual, you go through this whole ritual where you drink blood out of a human skull. And I first heard this from my dad. My dad is a Baptist pastor. He had a deacon in his church who was a very close friend of his. And this was while he was in New Orleans. And he said this man came to him and told him that I just left the lodge. And my dad says, well, praise God. Praise God you left the lodge. Good. And he said, I knew something was off when they offered blood communion. You had to take blood communion out of a human skull, in order to become a 32nd degree Freemason. Well, I looked into it. Come to find out, several other people that I came into contact with had family members who are still active Masons, and they told them the same things. When they heard me tell this, they asked their family members, and the family members said, yes, in fact, we took a blood communion out of a human skull. Now, this is kind of telling, because I also know another Mason that I asked personally. I looked him dead in the eyes and I asked him, and he nodded. He wouldn't say it, but he nodded. These things are real. These secret societies of our presidents, our CEOs of major companies sometimes, major power people that are part of these secret societies, they are still drinking blood, human blood, in their rituals today.
And that's part of, right out of the Scythian Sarmatian ancient ritual of drinking blood out of skulls.
Now, I want to make one comment about the Freemasons here. They have, in modern days, they have kind of softened up on some of their prerequisites, we'll say. Nowadays, if you have money, because some of the lodges, in different states, they're hurting for money. And so they have made it to where anybody can come and be a Mason, and you can literally elevate yourself. You can go to a weekend conference, or maybe 2 weekends in a row, and you can get crash courses on every degree, basically, and you can earn yourself up to the 32nd degree within a couple weeks. And they're crash courses. They run through everything. And it's possible that in these crash courses, which, by the way, most the real Freemasons out there, they despise this. They will tell you that this is fake, it's not legitimate, and that these people aren't real Masons. But it's possible that in these crash courses that they have a fake skull chalice, and it's possible that they put grape juice in it. I don't know. But the real Masons will tell you that the true ritual that you have to earn is a real human skull with real human blood. And this has been validated. And I've done multiple shows on the lodge. I think, Gary, you and I may have done a show on the lodge. I did a show on the lodge with Doc Marquis years ago. But this is a real deal. This is the real stuff that people need to understand. This is going on today. And our leaders, many of our leaders, the majority of our highest ranking leaders take part in some type of blood ritual.
I agree. And I think the Masons are looking to try and get membership, and they're changing things to a certain degree. But once you get to the 3rd degree in New York Rite, or the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, everything changes. The really only requirement is that you worship a god. And over time, they'll brainwash you through the various degrees to accept Lucifer as the great architect of the universe at the adept level. So I think they may be, loosening things up, but at the end of the day, at the core, at the Illuminati level, at the Adept level, they are still a Luciferian, blood-drinking, Nephilim-descending organization. And that's why you have to be invited to become part of the Freemasons. And you may not ever make it to Adept level because you don't have pure blood. And I know some actually do. But for the most part, that area is reserved for people who have either Nephilim bloodlines of however they prove it, genealogies, Nephilim DNA, spark of the divine, whatever they want to call it, the genobasis, that's reserved for the reptilian bloodlines. And they go right back to their blood drinking rituals.
Now, Gary, I know we're out of time. Can we hit one other quick topic? And I just want to get your feedback on one other thing if you're not pressed.
Go ahead.
So I've been watching a program called The Iron Fist. It's actually a really good show on Netflix. Very, very well done. And it gets into the Hollow Earth. It doesn't use that terminology, but it deals with opening up portals in Kunlun, Shambhala, and some of the mystical things that are happening behind the veil in this other realm that they call Shambhala. And they recently came out with a show. It's called Defenders, and it's kind of a spinoff. And it's got Luke Cage, it's got the Iron Fist, it's got the Daredevil, Jessica Jones, the whole array of these superheroes. And Sigourney Weaver's character, she's a member of, she's like the head of this secret organization called the Hand. And there's 5 leaders of the Hand, and of one finger. They each represent a finger on the Hand. And the Hand is a major ancient occult society that has, they pretty much run things. It's kind of like the equivalent of the Illuminati, but it's broken down to 5 major players. And each of these 5 players are ancient. Like, they have lived for thousands of years because they have continued in these rituals to extend their lives. And they're trying to capture the Iron Fist so that he can open the portal. We find out somewhere in the series that they need him to open the portal to Shambhala, or what they call Kunlun, so that Sigourney Weaver, because she's getting close to dying again, and she needs to get this liquid, which looks just like blood. She needs to get this special blood, that's what I'm going to call it, out of Shambhala or out of Kunlun, but they need the Iron Fist to open the portal for them so they can get this. They had 1 serving left, and they used it to resurrect another superhero who had recently died. And they put her in this sarcophagus, this ancient stone sarcophagus. And then they poured this blood in there, and it multiplied in the sarcophagus, and they brought the superhero back from the dead, but it wasn't her. It was like the vessel was there, but they taught her, like, it was almost like she was a child again. Now, are you familiar with any of the lore surrounding this resurrection with this supernatural blood?
Yeah, that's in a lot of occult mythology. Even when you see a resurrection of a vampire in Dracula in particular, that you see, a drop of blood goes to his lips, and all of a sudden it starts to manifest into this growing sort of blood again. Difficult to know what all of that means, and it's manifested in a whole bunch of other occult, scientific, horror movie genre as well, where you see that blood redeveloping. It's hard to know exactly where they're going with that, other than the fact that there is something special in the blood of the original Nephilim, or of the blood that come out of the fallen angels, that doesn't die because it is immortal, and that's what they're trying to recreate. But inevitably, these monsters that are risen from the dead, whether or not they're the undead or whatever you want to call them, they're not the original human being, and they are vessels. And they're either possessed by a demon, or they're avatared by a fallen angel. You pick your poison on that one. But they're not the same. And it seems to be a constitutive part of occult ritual that there's an ability to bring back humans from the dead.
Now, when somebody dies, if they are an organ donor, people have heard the old saying, we're going to put those organs on ice. We're going to take them, and even in movies where somebody would kill somebody just so they can harvest their organs. And again, I'm only using this as a point of reference. I'm not saying that all this is real, what we see in the movies. But if they when a person dies, they can put their organs on ice to keep them, to transfer them so they can be put into another human. Now, if a body dies, in the Bible, we see that when somebody dies, they give up the ghost. In the King James, it says, they give up the ghost, or it's basically like their spirit leaving their body. And it's interesting that the body itself, the shell, and I'm just going to kind of apply the science to the body as we can apply to the organs. And we know this is true because organs can last on ice. So if the body if they take a body and do some type of ritual to it,
have a good sleep.
I think it's possible. And I know this is going to sound crazy to some people, and this may be a conspiracy theory, but we have to understand that these people really believe these things and they really practice these things, and they have for thousands of years. But it's possible if there was a vessel that they deemed worthy of, being inhabited by another entity, that if they get this body quick enough into a ritual chamber, that they might be able to resurrect the body, but it's not the soul or the spirit, because we can't do that. That goes against the laws of God. But it seems that they might be able to call into or channel in a demonic entity to bring that body up, almost like an avatar or like a golem of sorts. And again, it sounds crazy though, Gary.
Well, it is, but if you understand occultic language, and you understand that they believe in an elixir of immortality that is closely related to the starfire and with menstruum of the blood, there's something there that they believe that they can resurrect the dead with this sort of immortal characteristic to certain kinds of blood.
I'm at a point in my life and where I am in my studies that I'm not really shocked. These things don't really shock me the way they might used to have shocked me. But anytime we see this type of behavior, and it goes directly against the ordained laws of God, literally it goes against the structure that God has set up, and we see that it's supernatural in nature, we know that we're dealing with demonic practices. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of these things in the last days. I see Dracula scaling walls. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, we see he was able to scale a wall. And there's some interesting thoughts I have about that as well. Maybe we'll talk about that another time, because I know we're running out of time here. But this is one of those topics, Gary. I think it's very important that people understand that this reptilian lineage is real, that it goes back into ancient history. It's literally maintained. I mean, you can't really deny its existence.
Well, and they believe it. Whether or not it's true or not, they believe it. And it's what they are doing and what they will do with that belief that's very, very important. And yet we do get hints out of the Bible that we ought to take it serious, where you have, Genesis 3:15 and the seed of the serpent. And I think through Genesis 6, as opposed to Cain, that we've covered off. But I think that is there somehow, some way. And I think, when you have a separation of the tares and the weeds, maybe that's another allegory in the Bible that may hint back to that, but that one's a bit more tenuous. But we need to be aware that there's something to the seed of the serpent. There's something to the Nephilim of Genesis 6, and it was there for a reason, to prepare us for what was to happen and what will happen in the end time.
Well, like the prophecy says in Genesis, there will be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And we know that the seed of the woman translates over to Jesus Christ. And so this is the ongoing battle between this reptilian lineage, and again, we say reptilian because it's going back to a serpent dragon entity. But I mean, this is the war that's going to be going on until Jesus returns.
Yes. And
destroys this wickedness for this earth age. And I think it's important that we do understand these tactics of the enemy. And as we're told in Ephesians 5:11, we are told to take no part in the wicked works of darkness, but to rather reprove them or expose them. And a lot of Christians don't talk about these things. You go to church on Sundays, and many times you hear the same message every week. There's so much more to the Bible. And so I hope these types of discussions encourage you listeners to want to research what the scripture says and then compare with historical references to get a better understanding of what these cultures believed. There's so much out there you can find, but you have to make sure that you don't dwell into the belief systems of these occult groups. You have to make sure you draw a fine line in your research and that you always understand that the Bible is our foundation. So, Gary, closing thoughts. I know we've gone over time. What would you like to say in closing?
Well, a couple of things is in Daniel 2, I think 43, when it talks about the metallic empires, and you have the offspring of those metallic empires interbreeding with the offspring of humankind. There's a mixing going on here, and that foretells us of what's going to happen in the end time, that somehow, some way, Nephilim are going to impact the world in the end time. Whether or not they're recreated descendants, you pick your poison on that one, but they will have an impact in the end time. And we also know that the spiritual forces are trying to recreate a new Atlantis, also known as the New Age of Aquarius. It's the same allegory. Why are they wanting to do that? Is because the ancient Atlantean Empire had 10 pieces to its empire, and they were trying to form a world government, and they have sort of revisited the idea that they were the helm of world government, even though the Athenians, according to Plato, defeated them before they could actually enslave the whole world. And what's important about that is that Poseidon married a human female by the name of Clymene and a few other names in other accounts, but essentially a human female, and produced 5 Nephilim Titan kings to rule over that kingdom. That's what they're trying to set up in the end times. So it's important to understand that these Titans were Nephilim, that they had that serpentine look, that they are trying to take over the world, have been from the beginning, and they want this rendezvous with destiny in the end time to win their freedom from who they believe is the oppressive God of the Bible. So it's important for us Christians to understand that this is going to happen, and somehow, some way, these reptilians are going to affect the end time. And if I could, Justin, I'd like to just recap something I said a little bit earlier that I was a little bit unclear on, I think, in terms of the lily. I just would like to connect it a little bit better. So, the lily is a significant occultic allegory, and it represents the lily of the valley. And as we saw represented as it comes forward in the fleur-de-lis, that becomes the coat of arms for the French kings and for the Priory of Sion, which is the sponsor of the Templars, which is another rabbit hole to go down. But as I connect that back, you have to understand Lilith, who is a female vampire, Upier, is the dragon queen of the Anunnaki, or Nephilim. And she's the queen of the dragon court, as they used to call it in Sumeria, variantly known as Owl Queens, which the Bohemian Grove, who picks and chooses and supports all of the presidential candidates in the United States, has as their imagery for the Bohemian Grove meetings, and a big owl that's posted there. And so fairy and owl are the matriarchal allegories for the bloodline, just as raven as an Anunnaki type of raven god, and the dragon or the serpent allegory as they also show up, because they show up as both depictions, as for the patriarchal bloodline that becomes allegorized through Dracula that we talked about before. But she is queen of the dragon court, and she's likened in ancient writings to lilies and lotus flowers and names that spawn out of that, like Lily, Lula. Just as Lilith is thought to be the consort of, or the wife of Cain, and that all appear all throughout sort of Grail, ring, dragon, and fairy culture and mythology. And what's important about that is that when I talked about the Grail dynasty going back to Lily and the word Dulac and the house Dulac of the Camelot families, we need to understand that goes beyond Lilith to her progenitor, which was Tiamat or Leviathan, which was originally a serpent of the sea. So that's how they have these complex layers of allegories that just sort of go everywhere.
Now, on the Lilith topic, I think we just have to insert here, there's a lot of information on the internet about Lilith. A lot of religions believe in Lilith. They've got all types, more than we could even compile into one show. And I want to make the point that while I do believe there is an entity known as Lilith, that it's kind of like I believe that there were entities known as the Anunnaki. But the origin points, as they've told mankind, I don't agree with. And so I think that we can say, yes, there's a Lilith entity, but I don't believe that the story of her origin is accurate. That, they generally trace her back to being the first wife of Adam. I don't believe we can substantiate that whatsoever. But this is what entities do. They bring their own history and they teach that to mankind as gospel.
Yeah, that Lilith thing as being the wife of Adam comes through mystical Hebrew roots and an adoption of the Sumerian sort of ideology. I talk a little bit about that in my book. And so it's very questionable whether or not Lilith is an actual individual or not. But certainly they believe from the spirit side that she is real and one of the important figures to them in prehistory. And if she was real, she probably isn't a fallen angel. She's probably a female Nephilim and demigod of the very early sort of part of the creation of giants in the antediluvian epoch.
It's interesting because you have these terms floating around when you get back into medieval demonology, which I'd love to do a show on medieval demonology at some point. But you have so many references in this ancient, these old accounts of these incubus and succubus demons. And many people say, well, I was hit by an incubus or succubus while I was sleeping. And many people will think that it's one entity, but it's not, because these entities are not omnipresent. And I think it's important to throw that out there. Christians oftentimes give the enemy too much credit. The only omnipresent entity is God, the Godhead, what we call the Trinity in Christianity. That's the only omnipresent God out there. Everything else is a lowercase g, and they're not omnipresent. They can only be at one place at one time, meaning they can only affect one person at one time. So I think a lot of these demon entities, they will either pose as greater entities, for their sake of being worshipped, or they will literally just go and do what they're taught to do by their hierarchy. So I think it's interesting. And just to clear myself on something I said, Gary, I don't want anybody to come back and say that I'm teaching that dead people get resurrected in the occult. I was using that just to explain that they teach that their bodies, that they can resurrect a body, but in the event that even did happen, it would not be the person that died. It would just be an avatar. I just want to make that really clear. People misunderstand things,
It's not a Christian belief. It's an occultic belief, whether or not it's the mummy horror movies, it's the undead, or it's the undead from Vampire Tales, or zombies. It's manifested in all sorts of different genres in horror and science fiction. So it's part of the occult belief, not Christian belief.
Yeah, and interestingly, you mentioned some of the mystical Hebrew root stuff. I've not yet seen the new Mummy movie with Tom Cruise. Matter of fact, I'm going to watch it very soon. I'm really looking forward to seeing it and kind of breaking it down. But if you notice the demonic mummy female, and again, I don't want to speak too soon because I haven't seen it, but if you look at the pictures of her on the internet of her face, she appears to have what looks like Paleo-Hebrew letters on her face, which was just kind of interesting. Have you noticed that?
No, I haven't seen the movie yet.
Man, I know we've gone overtime, Gary. We were shooting for an hour and 15 minutes, but it's always a great discussion with you. And thank you so much for the fourth watch. And man, there's a couple of shows I'm going to email you about. I really would like to get you back on to talk about some of these topics separately.
Sure.
And lastly, you made reference to Atlantis. You and I did a show on Atlantis that, and I'm not trying to toot our horns because we're just people that teach, but it's probably one of the best breakdowns of Atlantis in the amount of time that we had. It's available on YouTube. It's called Atlantis. It's on my Spreaker page as well. Maybe we could get that show shared on the Gary Wayne group on Facebook, because people need to hear that breakdown. You did a phenomenal job, Gary. So people who want to know about Atlantis, you got to check out that episode.
Yeah, I think that's a very good show, and I'd also encourage people to go back and listen to part one of this set of interviews, because you'll find the consistency and the connections important if you listen to both sort of back to back.
I would totally agree, and the show's doing really well. A lot of people have tuned in. We get a lot of thumbs down. We get a lot of negative comments from New Agers because they like that we're teaching the information, but then we come in and we tell them the truth about that information from a biblical perspective.
Yeah.
But you know what? We do these shows not just to reach Christians. We want to reach New Agers with the gospel. That's one of the main reasons that we get into these things. We don't want to see Christians deceived, but we also want to see the unbelieving world come to Christ. So anyway, Gary, thank you so much again. I'll be in touch with you very soon, and looking forward to scheduling some more shows. Well, that was an interesting discussion, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Okay. think
we're talking about higher entities today. It's your new film. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first? If you want, just look at the camera. I'm just kidding. So I'll just say, just give us a little rundown of who you are and what you do, and then we can talk about.
All right, cool. My name is Justin Fall, and my background is in film production. I'm a film student from the Art Institute of Atlanta, and I'm also a career researcher. That's my ministry is my career. Like my main focus in life is to be able to wake up the church. I want to be able to better equip the church, and I want them to understand that the times they're going to be coming upon the face of this earth, which we are approaching. No one would deny that crazy prophecies are being fulfilled right now. Things that 100 years ago, the average Christian would not have understood the scripture the way that they would today, based on the unfolding of events that we're seeing. And so as a career researcher, that my ministry is all about equipping the saints for the last days, equipping the tribulation saints, even if you want to use that language, but also to join the conversation of the world. I think that Christians need to be able to join the conversation about the paranormal, about the crazy topics. We need to join that conversation and give a biblical answer that will cause the world to want to draw near unto Christ. I think what's happening is people are having experiences, and this is so major when you consider that an experience, one simple experience in an individual's life, can change the course of their life. I mean, they have one supernatural experience, and it can change everything. And so as a Christian, we see what the Bible teaches, but the world doesn't have that foundation. And so when they have a supernatural or a paranormal experience, they're now going to go down a different direction. And I believe it's a toxic direction, so much that people are having these experiences and they're wanting to get answers. And so they're getting the wrong answers from the wrong people. And they're now wanting to communicate with said entities, the UFOs. I heard a story just the other day. A dear friend of mine had a family member living in Hawaii, and his whole religion was not anything written in a book. His religion was based on his experience, and his experience was to walk out on the beach, sometimes using psychedelics, and he would just stand with his feet in the water in Hawaii, and he would be communicated with by alien entities. And the friend of mine who told me the story, he's a born again Christian. He's firm in his faith. He's very much awake to the deceptions of the enemy. But he shared this with me, and he said that these experiences have changed this man's life because you can't tell him, A, that those experiences weren't real, or B, that those experiences were evil. This is what's happening in the church today with the hyper-charismatic movement. They are having experiences, and they're told that this is the Holy Spirit.
Wow. Well, what do you think it is?
I believe that we are entertaining all types of spirits around us. If you could just see into the spirit realm, even in the most public place, at the shopping mall, at the restaurant, if you could just peer behind the veil, I personally believe you would see all types of spirits, and they're all operating, differently. A familiar spirit is familiar with the person that it's going after. They know where you eat, where you sleep, where you live. And as a Christian, those familiar spirits are going to want to come towards you and to tempt you where they can. I made a statement on the SGT report recently that spiritual warfare is changing. It looks different now than it might have looked 50 years ago. Absolutely. And it even changes in my life. From my first year of being a Christian, the attacks were different. They looked different. The demons were hitting me at a different place than they're trying to hit me now, having been walking with the Lord since I was 21. I'm almost 37 now. And so the attacks are different. They look different. They feel different. And they are, I don't want to use new age language, but it's almost like they're on a different frequency.
So do you believe that the other side is adapting to the modern consciousness of people, that how everybody's changing, and with technology and smartphones, do you think that they're using that?
I think they're using that, but I think it's more on a personal level. So for instance, the things that you were weaker with as a baby Christian, it was easier to get tempted to give into this sin or that sin as a baby Christian. But as you grow, the Bible talks about this process called sanctification. And the sanctification process, you get stronger, and it's not anything you're doing. It's actually the work of God. It's his sovereign work in your life to sanctify you. He bears fruit in our lives. Now, when I think about that, I think about how we get stronger in the Lord and our faith gets stronger. We're closer to him. We're being sanctified. And so the things that used to trip us up in the past, we are no longer getting tripped up by. And so the enemy has to change his tactics because he knows that he's not going to get me with the same temptations that I had as a baby Christian. So he now tries to hit me in a different place.
Wow. Is this kind of why you decided to make the film Higher Entities?
Higher Entities, it's a film that deals with a very much political, paranormal conspiracy. Yes and no. I mean, we made Higher Entities for a lot of different reasons. The timing of Higher Entities could not have been better because we're dealing with a film that it digs deep into these areas of government alien entity connections. Now, why is that important? Because we're living in a time where we understand that the Antichrist is coming on the face of the earth. There will be an Antichrist. And we know that he has fallen angels that are going to be working with him. He's going to have a demonic army. He's going to have all types of lying signs and wonders. The Bible talks about these lying signs and wonders. And if it were possible, the elect would be deceived by his cunning. So it's very interesting that we see this. Now, granted, I want to make a very quick statement here if I can.
I can't do this. There are memories that I just can't bear.
If I can. A lot of people misuse that passage about the elect being deceived. Mm-hmm. The elect are deceived in everyday life. As a Christian, we get deceived. I get deceived sometimes. We can all be deceived as Christians, but that passage is referring to a specific time, specific place, dealing with your salvation versus the Antichrist. Now, when you consider that passage, if it were possible, that's how deceptive the Antichrist is going to be. He's going to be so deceptive that if it were possible, the elect would be deceived. Now, that's dealing with their salvation. At that time, the true elect of God who are filled with the Holy Spirit will not be deceived by him to the degree of their salvation. Now, they might be deceived by the Antichrist politically, following after whatever it is he's pushing and selling, but there will come a time where their salvation is on the line and no, they will not be deceived according to Scripture.
So do you see this as like the end times event? Aliens coming down, declaring to be saviors of humanity, saying there's a cataclysm coming and we can save you, but you have to take the mark of the beast or something like that?
I believe the aliens in the last days, which we don't really believe them to be space aliens, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes, but I believe that the alien entities, the higher entities, they will likely use some type of a cataclysmic event, something major, whether it's real or synthetic. We know about Project Bluebeam. We know about technology where they can project an image in the sky. They can simulate a false rapture, and the news could be used. My team that I work with, Wes Fall, Chad Riley, Fourth Watch Films, Fall Brothers Productions, we don't believe in a pre-trib rapture. And I want to lay this out there very clearly. The deception surrounding a pre-trib rapture, I believe, will be used in this alien deception. They can synthesize a fake rapture. The news could promote it. Nobody can disprove it because all the channels of media are going to be promoting this idea, and they're going to have crisis actors. They're going to have footage. They're going to have possibly CG being mixed in with real video. We don't know how that's going to go down, but there could be a fake rapture event where they stage it so that people who are not firmly rooted in Christ, maybe people who have heard the gospel, they've received the gospel, they think they're saved, but they're not really saved. There's no fruit in their life. There's no root that's taking place. Those people will fall away thinking that they've missed the rapture.
That's scary stuff, man. Is that maybe what Jesus was talking about when he said, many will come to me on that day saying, Lord, Lord, and I'll say, back away from me, I never knew you?
No, Jesus said that there's coming a time where they're going to say to him, Lord, Lord, I did all this good stuff in your name. The thing that gets my attention there is that he mentioned some specifics, like casting out demons in your name. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a major denomination right now that they make their big deal on casting out demons. There's a couple of them, actually. There's going to be people that think they're operating in spiritual gifts, yet Jesus is going to say, I never knew you. But what we're talking about with this alien idea, the aliens are going to be giving different types of experiences to people. This is what people have to understand.
the experiences have to be tested with scripture,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise we're going to accept them because they're supernatural experiences, whether it's a supernatural healing, whether it's some type of a prophetic event where they speak a word of knowledge or they know something about your history, whatever it may be. The aliens could have a cure for cancer. The aliens, these higher entities are coming from a different place than us. They're not earthborn. The only ones that could be earthborn would be the demons, which came through the line of the Nephilim. And obviously that's a little bit of a different scenario. It ties in together. But with higher entities, we're dealing with, there is a group that we tracked in this film called the Collins Elite.
Okay.
And the idea was trying to answer the question, were there events in history where the American government was working with entities? That was kind of the beginning of this research. And if so, what happened? Can we validate this? What came of that? But also, were there factions in the government who stood up against these things? That was the premise of this film. And we started off by talking about a group known as the Collins Elite.
Okay.
Now, let's just go back in time. There was an event that took place back in the late 40s known as the Babylon Working Ritual. Now, this was a ritual that was carried out by Jack Parsons, JPL. People will even to this day say that JPL stands for Jack Parsons Laboratories, but on paper, it's Jet Propulsion Laboratories. JPL is major. It's a historic, so much surrounding this, so much history here. Jack Parsons was not professionally trained, yet he was tapping into high technology and building rockets. How do you do that without any type of formal training? There were no rocket programs in America before Jack Parsons. This is paramount to understand. This guy was tapping into theosophy, Thelema, the religion of Aleister Crowley. He was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and he was working with L. Ron Hubbard, who was the founder of Scientology. Interestingly, not only did L. Ron Hubbard start Scientology, but he was a science fiction writer. The movie Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, well, that was written by L. Ron Hubbard. Interestingly, also, John Travolta is a Scientologist, right? Now, I mention this because this is a man who writes science fiction, yet he started a religion based on science fiction. There has to be something in there where he's getting these clues and these ideas. He's getting these from another realm.
So do you believe that the Babylon Working Ritual made contact with the other side, and then the people involved with the ritual received special knowledge that would go on to create rocketry and stuff like that, high technology that they would never have without?
Absolutely. Babylon Working was successful according to Jack Parsons. Matter of fact, Parsons said in his Antichrist Manifesto that they were successful and that a child was conceived in that act, and that there was a spirit known as Hilarion. The Whore of Babylon was what they were trying to bring about. They believed what we believe, in that America was the final Babylon. Like, this was the revived Babylon. They believed it, and they were occultists. We're Christians, and we believe it. There's evidence to back this up. But yes, let's backtrack just for a second. What happened was they opened up this portal. They created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this Whore of Babylon being birthed, but other entities, because people all over the place started having paranormal encounters, and they began to report this to law enforcement, report this to the FBI, report this to whatever agency they could get in touch with. And so the federal agencies said, we've got to come up with an answer for this. We were not prepared for any of this. There's UFO activity. There's talk of entities and demons and winged creatures and just all kinds of weird, just paranormal demonic activity following this ritual that Jack Parsons said finally worked. They did the ritual for a couple years. It finally worked, finally stuck. And that's what a scientist does. A scientist is going to work at something. He's going to work at the hypothesis until it's proven true or false. Now, finally, the researchers, the government puts together this group that says, we're going to get answers to what exactly took place out there in the desert in California by Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. They go to Jack Parsons. And keep in mind, Jack Parsons is also working with the government. He's now been given, special privileges on things. So they go to him and they say, Jack, all of this stuff that's happening right now, did you do this? Did you do this? And he said, I think so. Now,
thanks, Ian. I knew he was due. Okay, here we go.
just before you came on, Mike, that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration issued a release of an incoming wave 15 minutes before we came on the air, and they dated it tomorrow, January 6th, okay, 2023. So they were getting out ahead of it, I guess. So let's dive in, Mike. Enough of me talking. Tell us what's going on with the January 5th wave.
Well, here's one of the issues with any kind of wave coming in, right? At the sun, everybody knows about solar winds. They go out to the heliosphere, all the way past Kuiper Belt to the heliosphere. It was at about 8.7 million miles. But if we did not have that past Paul right now, even with the Earth's magnetic field, let's just say the magnetic field of the Earth was twice or 3 times, 4 times stronger than what it is right now. If we did not have the heliosphere, all of us would die, okay? Because galactic cosmic rays are constantly pressing against our solar system. And the solar winds shoot out from the sun, right? That pressure, that heliopause, or that pressure, causes a bubble around our entire solar system, a continuous bubble. Solar winds going out, winds that can reach up to 2 million miles per hour. They go out, they go right to the heliosphere, and they are resisted, or they hit a wall of galactic cosmic rays trying to come in inbound. Some of them pour through, right? Some of them don't. Galactic cosmic rays are small subatomic particles, and if they penetrate the nuclei of cells, they can cause, in fact, they can change chemical composition. They can destroy or reorder DNA and cells, right? So they can cause a lot of damage. If we did not have the heliosphere, we'd all die. Doesn't matter what the Earth's magnetic field would be, we wouldn't make it, right?
Okay.
So whenever a pulse comes in, you're not only dealing with more galactic cosmic rays, but the heliopause, or the heliosphere, is already being resisted by other galactic cosmic rays that constantly come in, constantly.
Wow.
So any uptick in that pressure, it lets more particles come through, and that's what we're facing. Since January 2nd, right, we've had some small, I'd say maybe a trickle or two from different sides. We had today, the buildup began probably around, I'd say probably about 3 hours ago. It started to build up at the heliopause, picked up by 2 probes. One of them was so intense that they had to do some or send out some code, because they have to do some adjustments. That's a lot of money out there just sitting out there, right?
Yeah.
And these galactic cosmic rays, they're traveling at about the speed of light. They can damage electronics and everything else. And of course, those small probes don't have enough to create a magnetic field to redirect that stuff. So, damage is incurred. Well, it's coming inbound, and our sun is going to be the recipient of all those rays, but so is the Earth. Now, the Earth may be able to absorb most of them, it may not. They have to pick up a wave pattern. And here's what we're talking about. From the heliosphere, which is way outside, that big bubble, right? The big bubble the solar system is in, there are magnetic ripples that go inward toward the sun. Right? It's kind of like a vortex of magnetic field lines. Most of these particles will begin to follow those field lines directly into the sun. Depending on how they are positioned, depending on how the waves are positioned, the Earth could sit right smack dab in the middle of one of those intersect points, which is what we could face within a range of time from about, I'd say now, it's probably about 5 to 10 hours.
What?
We could face some of that. Now, it's been a buildup since January 3rd, right?
Yeah.
In fact, one of the first smaller detections took place January 3rd. 2 of the bigger pulses hit today, just a few hours ago. And so those effects are going to continue to pour in. That could really cause the sun some issues.
When you say 2 of those pulses, you're saying the wave of January 5th is causing also pulses? Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It's actually a pulse of concentrated. Think of somebody throwing water on you, right?
Okay.
Some of the water is going to be concentrated in certain areas, and other parts will just be tiny little water droplets. That's what we're facing.
Okay.
So it's all pouring in to our solar system. It already overwhelmed the heliosphere, and we already have a neutrino increase count down in some of the sub-laboratories already. So that's what we're facing. Now, this has to be monitored, of course, because our magnetosphere has, I believe they said, 38 places in our shielding of the Earth, which are extremely weak. So that means even right now, we're going to get to the point at some point where solar winds can get through there. Now, again, just to remind everybody, without the magnetic shielding of the sun, right? The sun has to be very active to keep the heliosphere going. If the sun degenerates because there's not enough activity coming off the sun, it's just not. It's not pushing back some of these pulses as it should or as it could. And because, the sun is not pushing out those solar winds strong enough, the galactic cosmic rays are overwhelming the force of those solar winds coming right into us. Just remind everybody, without the magnetic shielding of the heliosphere, everything on Earth would die. In fact, if something happened to the heliosphere right now, right, within 24 hours, I would say 50% of life on this planet will be dead. And about, I'd give it a week, 100% of life would be dead. So that's how dangerous these galactic cosmic rays are. They are deadly. They're more than dangerous. They're fatal. They're deadly, fatal to everything.
So you are okay, and I can hear it in the pitch in your voice. I can feel the excitement and the analyzation that you've been going through. You're privy to some information that we're not. Are the scientists? Are they going crazy tonight? I mean, are they glued to their panels and
well, it's a very burning, I'll just say, mind-numbing balancing act that's happening at the heliosphere. All right, sounds like a harmless term. Galactic cosmic rays sounds like a normal term. It's only been normal because the sun has been shielding us all this time. But Pastor Paul, the sun's activity, although it sends out spurts of power, the sun is weakening its ability to stop these galactic cosmic rays from coming in at the time when we need it most, because they've already detected certain magnetars. There are detections in space that indicate we're going to undergo some magnetar hits. And of course, that's a planet killer, just so everybody knows. As a 1 inch by 1 inch block of a magnetar, right? When it shifts, just a 1 inch by 1 inch block, when it shifts on such a concentrated ball, a magnetar, it sends out a pulse that's able to destroy life on this planet. It can knock our atmosphere totally off, and we'll end up like Mars in a week. It doesn't take that long, right? But we do have our shielding, which means once these magnetar waves come in, that's an earthquake 1,000%. That's going to be an earthquake because the Earth cannot rebuttal the forces that are inbound. Not only that, but one of the biggest issues, even right now, is the sickness of people. These rays, once they concentrate, they always hit the surface of the Earth, always, but they will increase. And when this happens, radiation sickness is going to be very real. Imagine a person being exposed to radiation over time, right? No symptoms on the skin so much, but internally, nausea, unending migraines, a metallic taste in your mouth, eyesight is gone. Your certain soft features of your nasal cavities gone, no smell, almost like you had COVID-19, mumps, chicken pox, monkeypox, and everything else all at the same time, until ultimately you begin to liquefy. And that's what would take place. You know what? There is a place in the Bible, because there's a weapon that utilizes that same, let's just say that same pattern, right? It's not we're not talking about a nuclear weapon. There are worse things in nuclear weapons, but it will melt the soft tissues of the human body within seconds if they ever detonate this.
Wow.
And There are quite a few. I think there are like 12 or 13, 14 on the planet. But it's worse than nuclear, right? I'm sure that the world will be introduced to a slew of new weapons here shortly because everything is coming out. But this phenomenon that we're having right now, the measurements are going to be incredibly important because this is going to sound wild, but imagine sometime this year us entertaining the same galactic cosmic ray count times about 1,000 with a force of 1,000. I don't think our magnetosphere could handle that. And in fact, I think it would overwhelm both the north and south poles of the Earth, causing a like St. Elmo's fire to form all over the planet, which means we have auroras all over the Earth. And if that took place, sure, it looked beautiful for a couple of hours until the radioactive portion kicked in, right? Then we'd have chemical changes. Inert materials would begin to explode again. That same routine, except this time it would be with just about all inert materials. Even epoxy. If people have epoxy sitting around, that stuff's going to blow up wherever it is. Lithium batteries. Lithium batteries can be affected by galactic cosmic rays, causing them to reach a critical overload point. You can't reverse that. Once lithium goes into its that overload point, it will explode. So can you imagine a lot of the world's cell phones exploding and people have no idea why their cell phone is heating up within seconds and then poof. And see, these are things people don't think about, but they are things that they keep a lot of folks up at night because we know people are walking around with bombs in their back pockets, on their ears and everywhere else. And all it takes is a small chemical change to knock out some of the nuclei within some of the elements within that lithium, and it will overload.
There's a scripture
it will reach critical mass.
There's a scripture you talked about, and I just found it. It's Zechariah 14:12, and it says, "And this shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth." Soft tissue, melting.
Soft tissue. Yep.
So you're saying that this wave, this cosmic wave, if it's so outrageously strong that it messes up the sun's magnetic field or shield, and it messes up ours, it could actually cause this effect to the human race.
That's right, because any type high-speed particle coming inbound, which is unimpeded, right, will knock the nuclei right out of any particulate out there. And once that happens, it's no longer what it used to be.
Well, here's what the oceanic, this is what the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration said today, which is dated tomorrow. Galactic cosmic rays or waves are slowly varying, highly energetic background source of energetic particles that constantly bombard the Earth. But these GCR originates outside the solar system and are likely formed by explosive events such as a supernova. This highly energetic particles consist of essentially every element ranging from hydrogen, accounting for approximately 89% of the GCR spectrum, to uranium, which is found in trace amounts only. These nuclei are fully ionized, meaning all electrons have been stripped from these atoms, and because of this, these particles will interact with and are influenced by magnetic fields. The strong magnetic fields of the sun will modulate and the GCR flux and spectrum of the Earth. Is that what you're saying?
At common count, yes. At common low count, yes. But it's when it's overwhelmed, you can throw that out. That's not going to happen because when it's overwhelmed, we're looking at, if we had maybe 7 X-class flares, we may be okay, right? But we don't. We had 3 days ago, we had an X-class. Right after that, there was more activity on the sun. There's some forming right now. There's certain bands forming on the sun, which we're going to face in a couple of days. But look at our volatility on the Earth. We have a bunch of nuclear manufacturing places, right, to manufacture energy. So we have uranium sitting there. We have depleted uranium all over the USA. We have these big mountains with radioactive waste sitting in them that people don't even think of. All these are regions that are volatile. And if something takes place, that uranium that's been spent, those rods that have been spent, they can be chemically changed from the inside out. If that were to take place, then that wherever it is, it's going to be irradiated through the soils. Forget about the soils, because once galactic cosmic rays penetrate the surface of the earth, they're going to change the chemical composition of the soil, allowing for radiation, more radiation to come through from inside the earth outside. Every time this happens, the earth emits higher amounts of gamma rays, right? A lot of people don't really fit that into their modeling, but the earth produces gamma rays in dangerous levels in some places, so much so they have to quarantine these places or mark them off. Nobody can go in these places. When people, here's an indication, when you see air traffic change, right? When you see it not flying in certain areas, then take note of those areas, because at higher altitudes, they're going to be exposed the most. And every time this takes place, they start making these fly zones. You can't, they make these quarantine zones. You cannot fly an aircraft through. And every single, all the ATCs are going to get instruction to start diverting flights away from these protected areas.
Wow.
Because they're highly irradiated.
So Southwest Airlines, just went through this debacle during the holidays. I realized it was a storm, but there's Southwest is saying, no, this doesn't have nothing to do with the storm. They're saying that they were sabotaged. But Mike, are you saying that there's going to be some cancellation of flights and things just because of these waves?
Well, sure you would. Sure you would. Here, a good way to look at this is if we probably won't see it now, but if you ever look at the map and there's no weather phenomena, right? None whatsoever. But then they start diverting flights out of normal flight paths, right? Like I believe they have these trackers on the internet. I believe people can get access to. When you see traffic diverted from these areas, or altitudes, right, are not approved to go up beyond 17,000 feet, you know that something has happened, right? That's a very good indication. If you don't see any planes, you might want to reconsider your whole day, right? We've had that a couple of times and not one soul took notice. Nobody took notice. I didn't hear it anywhere. It was almost like 25% or 75% of the flights were canceled, not by COVID, but they were just gone. And nobody said anything. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, there were 4 specific areas in the USA nobody could fly in. Nobody said a word, right?
Wow.
So if they track these flights and you start seeing deviations, they're doing this for a reason, right? So we're in this thing, we're going to get into a time, Pascal, when, and I believe that's going to happen fairly quickly, right? That most of our devices are going to start going through quirky things. Of course, they did change the internet Wednesday. So some of the quirkiness that people have today could be part of that. But the other part is they're going to be.
What do you mean they changed the internet Wednesday? What did they do?
Oh, the internet has gotten it's been altered. It's not like it was. It's been altered severely. It's been altered. So, first of all, they're pushing. Listen, they're going towards this new governmental system, right?
Okay.
You remember when I said that term, governmental civil war?
Yes.
Right.
I remember you saying that. Yes.
That means they're going to a brand new level of fighting amongst each other. They're going to use brand new tactics. They're going to push this system forward no matter what. I don't believe that as it stands right now, nobody is standing in its way. Nobody is standing in its way. Anybody who dares to do that, they're going to fry them publicly to make an example. They're not going to be able to do this. And it's Christians, as being a Christian, all of us understand that the kingdom of the beast is coming, but here's the issue. Yes, the kingdom of the beast is coming, but as it's forming, I often wonder how in the world did they get so far in the first place? Because if it were so open, and all of us could see it, certainly we would start praying against it, right? That's not the case because we can't see it, right? It's right under our noses. And it's just like cryptocurrency. we began to talk on your show, Pastor Paul. We were talking about the system of cryptocurrency, right?
Yep.
How that they're going to take that system and they're going to incorporate this into, some of the major new financial systems that they have. Well, guess what? As soon as we start talking about that, not long after that, you saw the decline, a deliberate takedown of cryptocurrency, which, by the way, it's not going to work. They're just going to have the hand over. They're evening the field for something, because how can it go down and you have all these people who are getting rid of anybody who can oppose them? Remember, we had that talk before. Anybody who can oppose them that's in cryptocurrency, they're going to take them down. That's precisely what they're doing.
Yes, they will.
That's what they're doing.
So you're saying that, the Bible says that this beast kingdom in Revelation, it says that no one can make war with the beast. It'll even brag about it. Who's able to make war with the beast? Who can stand up against it? And really, no one on the earth can. It has to be done supernaturally by Jesus Christ. We can't. We can't stop it. We can have God in our heart, Christ in our heart. So He helps us navigate through this as much as possible. But we can't actually stop it. That's what I'm hearing you say. You can't stop a prophecy of the Antichrist and the beast kingdom that's coming. So when you're saying that they're working on these things, they're changing the internet, they're changing the banking system, they're going to the Great Reset, we got the World Economic Forum, we got all this coming. This is all part of a global plan. Do they take into account these waves, Mike? You said there's going to be 17 of these. Is this one we hit today? Is this the biggest one?
Pastor Paul, no. This is not. This is by no means the biggest one. This is an event that it's going to cause the sun to have effects. It will likely cause the earth to have effects. It's likely going to cause Jupiter to have effects. It will have, probably I'd say with the effects from this pulse will last about a week. So look throughout the week for things to happen. We could have quirky communication things. Yes, they're going to utilize anything that happens in the celestial realm. They're going to utilize that for their own advantage. And, one of the points I made was we can't see some of the elements of the beast kingdom, Pastor Paul, because we're born right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If I'm born in it, what about if a person is born inside the kingdom of the beast, they're not going to call it some evil kingdom. They're going to call it home. They're going to call it business as usual. And so one of the problems is so many people have gotten used to business as usual,
right,
that they can no longer see the immoral. There's some implacable components to this thing that are taking place. And if you think about it, the power of money itself is a real force to contend with. In the Bible, didn't God only compare himself? Jesus said, man cannot have two masters. You can't worship both God and mammon. So why did he only compare worshiping God with this other thing? And you look at the force of money right now. Money is the false Holy Spirit of the world. Because if a person does not have money, they don't have confidence either, right? No. They don't. And it's very real, because when you don't have money, it feels like you're powerless. But that's not the truth.
No.
That's my biggest, it's just not the truth.
Not the truth.
And so with this ugly kingdom coming in, right, which is coming in fast, it's actually for those of the world, for those who chose evil, it's going to suck them up like a vacuum. They'll all be a part of it. For the saints, it's going to cause us to stand in our positions, because that'll be the final line. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have to play patty cake with the world, and the Father will, we're going to be delivered from some things, but the transition past ball is going to be quite heavy. And I believe this year we're going to see so many things unfold. It's going to be so confusing at the end of 2023, and we won't, the comfort we have right now, we probably won't have then. We're not going to have it at the end of 2023, but those who believe in Christ, if they can stand their ground, if they cannot give in no matter what, just not give in to to anything, no matter what. I have a strong belief that God has preserved all of his children up until this point. He'll continue to do it. We're going to have to work in adverse circumstances. We're going to have red dust all over the place, stuff like that. Fires are coming. the water event is coming. I believe that we're going to endure this water event because it's, with all these galactic cosmic rays coming in, the atmospheric issues are going to double. They're going to double. And you heard if anybody listens to the National Weather Service, you guys have heard of an atmospheric river, right? That's I believe one of 15 terms they have made up because we discussed that. They have to make up terms for some of the new weather phenomena.
Yeah.
They can't deny it. They can no longer deny the fact.
Rain in California, they're calling it now the cyclone bomb. Sometimes you hear the word Genesis bomb, or rain bomb or whatever.
Right.
And
they say that
hyper hurricanes, hypercanes, this kind of stuff. It's new term.
Oh, it's coming out. And right now their biggest term is the atmospheric river. And what that is the convection of the water coming from the oceans going onto land. Now we're talking about it's almost just like a waterfall because it takes I believe they calculated 60% of the water that evaporates is caught in the clouds is falling right back to Earth. That's a lot of water.
That's a lot of
California is expected to have 13 inches, right? 13 inches of rain from one event is coming up. After that event, they have two more lined up right behind it. One will have 9 inches. The other one is estimated to have a total of 15 inches. Now, with all these weather phenomena coming through, what's going to happen? We're going to have floods on the East Coast coming up. We have 3 specific systems coming up also for the East Coast. You're talking about flooding all the way from the Great Lakes, a little before the Great Lakes, all the way to the East Coast. So it's going to be inundated with about 7 to 12 inches of water, not snow, water, right? So we have all these. The land masses are soon to change, right?
Are you thinking this wave that's coming, this wave that's hitting us right now, it's already causing the sun to explode with a X-class 1.2 solar flare. No doubt these charged particles, I remember you talking about, man, these waves could just suck the hydrogen right out of the sun.
They could cause a further chemical change in the sun.
Do you feel we're going to have an earthquake? I think I heard you say 1,000% there's an earthquake. Is this wave that's hitting right now, is it going to cause a strong 1 or 2?
I would expect one. Yeah, I expect one, Pascal, because it's BP or.
All right, Bobby Goods, welcome to the channel, mate.
Watch, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was just genius. I remember on your show, he kept coming on there. It was like, earthquakes are tied to the sun. He kept saying that.
Yes,
he said, and I believe somebody wrote, well, how come nobody else is saying it? And I believe he answered, because nobody else is looking like that, right? It was given to him.
Yeah.
So
that's
a proven issue. Right? That's a proven issue. That is a proven issue. And so when the sun changes, the earth changes also, right? And all these galactic cosmic rays, whenever there's an inundation of these things in the heliosphere, the sun is going to be affected. It's just going to be affected. The problem is, Pascal, this one, the measurements for this one is going to be critical because if nobody gets the measurements for this one, and it's not finished yet, it's not. It starts today, right? It's not going to end today. It does start today. It will affect the weather big time. It's going to affect the atmosphere big time, right?
Okay.
We could have. Now, this is from from looking at modeling. We could have an actual, I'll say, medium solar flare, right? One that's the opposite polarity of the Earth's magnetic shielding, which means it's going to directly oppose the shielding of the Earth and do what it's almost going to do what the Carrington event did, but to a smaller region. I'm going to go ahead and say that because the chemical changes on the sun are a bit too much. And the way these galactic cosmic rays are coming in, and based on these wave patterns, the polarity of these upcoming solar flares are not going to be in favor of the Earth. So anytime they're opposite like that, one's going to overwhelm the other, and we're going to be in trouble. To date, they have not, since the Carrington event, they have been in a polarity where the Earth could absorb them. In the opposite polarity, the Earth cannot absorb them, right? They directly oppose each other. and then poof.
So
That's
this,
what will
this
happen. So
incoming cosmic wave is disrupting the natural law that God put in play for our solar system.
it's stability. Yes, stability is. It's almost like stability is being lost.
And he did say this would happen. Jesus even said it, which is strange when you ask the question, tell us the signs of the coming of the Lord. And he tells you about all these stuff that's going to happen on the earth. And then he just stops and says, oh, by the way, there'll be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and the heavens are going to be shaken. Okay? It's just going to mess everything up. He throws that out there at the same time that all this other stuff's going on in the earth. So is this what he's talking about? I mean, you're saying this thing is just hitting now, but it's not done. So
no, it's not
how
done.
long does it take for this wave?
That's this one. Well, I'll know something much better as far as the ending of it once we can see the count, particulate count. Yeah. We're watching a particulate count. Once it starts going down, we know we're at the end of it, right? Okay. But there's more on the way. And I'm telling you now, these other ones are bringing fires. People are going to have to get prepped for some things, Fastball.
Fire.
I hope they do. Lots of fires. They got to get ready for fire. We're not going to escape a meteor storm. It's going to be like a hailstorm, but it's not going to be with hail. It's going to be with rocks, debris, things like that.
Yeah.
Right? After these storms hit over this month, next month, let's see, January, February, March. After March, what are the insurance companies going to do? Because you know what they're saying now, right? Maybe nobody knows. Maybe they didn't see it yet. I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody early. Okay. They're saying that water levels in the USA and other places are going to permanently change, and they're doing it right now.
In what way?
You know what that means?
What's that mean?
That means some people have houses that have recently been through a flood, and the water is not going to go away. In fact, that water is going to start to trickle up. It's going to go up. There have been certain places that used to have water. They're not going to have water anymore.
We've had a lot of floods this winter and summer.
Okay.
That's going away. So that means the topography of the USA is altering concerning where water was, where it's going to be. That's going to mess people up. Insurance companies, a lot of people right now are finding out their insurance companies will not cover to get their houses raised. It won't cover, right? And the expense is too much. I mean, the average person does not have $40,000 laying around to get their house raised up, 3.5 feet, 4 feet. And so the insurance companies are making up clauses right now. They'll be introducing these upgraded policies that everybody will get by email here soon to let them know some of the changes in policy concerning insurance. Certain people are being turned down to cover storm damage because they know the year that we're going into. And if you think last year was an eye opener, this year is going to be. I just hope that people aren't foolish. I hope they can hear the spirit, Fastball, because if they can't, if they refuse to hear, if they allow their eye to overrule what's put in their spirit, they're going to mess up big time. They're going to wish they didn't. They're just going to be in this losing thing. The Lord's not going to. He will guide us. He's going to guide us into the best places if we can. As a whole, we have to hear Him. We have to really hear Him this time. And if we can hear Him, we're going to be fine. But if anybody resists Him, that's going to come out of their pocket. He'll chase them. He's not going to disown them or anything. But I've been hard-headed before with the Lord. It will take you down to the ground. It really will.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Really don't want that. You don't want that.
No, you don't want Him taking you down. And He can. He will. But He gives you a chance.
He'll mess you up.
Yeah,
He will. He will. He does, Fastball. Yeah. He really does. He will let people know. It's just like driving down a road and you get this unction out of nowhere. It says, "Do not take this left," right?
I know.
And so if you resist it, if you say, "Well, I'm going to take it anyway," that attitude, well, you're gonna face consequences.
Yeah, you will.
I've done that before, and it worked out. It worked out just for a little bit. Then everything fell apart, plus some. I said, "Well, never again." So I learned to hear Him.
Next time I'm listening, next time you say I'm going that way, the way you want me to go, it's out of my way, 15 miles.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. So we're seeing the prophecies of the Bible then are really coming to pass because the scorching of men from the heat, the waters, the redistribution of water, it almost sounds like that. You know, it's like water's going to be where once there was no water, there will be, and where there was, won't be. Rain is going to be is raining in massive amounts in one spot and don't rain it on others. And even though God said He ain't going to destroy the world with water, it doesn't mean there won't be a lot of floods, won't be a lot of disruption and destruction, landslides and that kind of thing. Fires. You're almost talking about a fire, hellfire and brimstone almost falling on the earth. We've seen this happen before in the Bible, but it sounds like you say rocks and pebbles and causing fires to break out. You're supposed to be ready for that. So how many days will you be analyzing these particles from this wave? And can you tell us a date for the next wave?
Well, for this wave, I can tell you right now, I'm going to be up for about 78 hours more. I won't be sleeping. It's a lot to comb through and to get right. This year is going to be very different, Passball. Now, I had to be careful because I was trained with equipment and technology, and I have patents out there, and I can't mix the two because some of that's intellectual property, and I have to be careful what different things I do right now, because if anything is deemed to belong to somebody else, or I got it from somebody else, some specific entity, I'll have to retract it. So I have to be even careful right now. But I tell you right now, I'm going to do a lot this year because good people need good data. I mean, accurate and good data. And so there's data out there that's not is outside of a security bubble, right? This is data that's not boxed in. And there's some folks who have they have already been inside the box, but now that they're retired and outside the box, their contacts are not as numerous or in depth as they could be. So if they got the data, they would be they'd be on fire. Yeah. And so I'm gonna do everything to get that data. I'm gonna do a lot of things different this year. Why? Because I know that loss of life is coming. It's gonna build up. It's gonna come. People are gonna have it's gonna be something to deal with. It'll seem like people are worn out this year. Yeah. I mean, really worn out. I know that health degradation is going to be a very real obstacle for a lot of people this year. And so I have to do things a bit differently and step it up about 28 notches so that, in other words, give it my all plus my all again. Because I can tell you now, Satan he's gathered his minions, and they're going to push forward a system that is just going to entrap people. And if nobody is ready for this, right, it's not even the case if a person doesn't want to listen or anything else. There are individuals out there, they simply cannot make the faith to believe certain things yet, right? So where that's absent for them, they still believe in Christ. It's just that no one wants to move on the information that you cannot validate, right? Because a lot of people have families. And I tell people all the time, if you have children, don't move left or right until the Lord tells you, no matter what you hear, do not move left or right because you have a family. So they need the data to get validated. I'm going to do everything to get that data out there. That's going to be imperative this year. It's going to be a lot of lies floating around. People are going to see governmental factions start to break down. People will learn of a lot of lies. It's going to be highly deceitful. No validation anywhere. And then we're going to have that event like back in the 1200s where the earth was black. It was dark for about 10 years. I don't know that a lot of people know about that. Even before that, there was a cycle before that. It was dark for about 13 years. We're going through that cycle again. And this is a cycle. This cycle happens 8 times before the big cycle happens. And do you not know this is going to be the 8th time? So
when you say
they need that data also. This is the 8th subcycle of a bigger cycle. The 8th one where meteorites smack into the earth, where the sky turns dark for a number of years. This is the 8th one. Wow. And it's coming.
We're about to see this. It's about to happen.
It's coming. It's coming. And so, anybody out there who has the real data, the real knowledge, and can really can get it out there in a very responsible way, they need to. I'm certainly going to do everything I can to get that data to the right folks, because if they have that data, they don't have to guess or theorize, and they can really put a picture together.
All right, now, Mike, and I want to say there's over 10,000 of you here tonight. We're glad you're with us, and we're hearing some really great information from Mike around the world to help us understand about this wave, this January 5th wave that has hit, has affected the sun already with an X-class 1.2 solar flare. Mike's already can see some of the data, already see some of the particles and the data that's affecting. I can hear in your voice, Mike, when we first started, that the magnetosphere of the sun, if it affects it too much, it's going to really mess up the Earth. And this is the first of 17 of these waves. All right, there's two questions I got.
17 events. 17 events, Pastor Paul.
And one is there's a water event. You said that back in the webinar.
Yes. One is an impact.
It's an impact. We're going to get hit with an impact in the ocean somewhere.
Yes.
Is it going to affect a populace?
I'm sure it will. I can only assume that it will. I'm going to have to assume the worst on that one and say that it will. It's not going to be a planet killer or anything like that, but it'll certainly it's going to cause some trouble in certain places. So as we get closer to that date, trajectories will be out. People will start picking it up too around that time. It's not that it's going so fast somebody can track it. People are going to start seeing it.
Yeah. They
may not know what it is. They're going to start seeing it. It'll be a matter of days when they track it. That will give them, their personal trajectory of where it's going to hit based on the rotation of the Earth. And it would be it's a good chance it's going to hit right in the ocean, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be a good example. That's going to be the first of many penetrations in the atmosphere that we have, not aerial burst, but actual
impact. Yeah.
Space to land contact or space to ocean contact. So we're going to see a lot of that. A lot of these inundations that's going to cause fires. That's a big concern of these. It's going to cause fires. A lot of
and these are all starting tomorrow, he reckons, on January the 5th or the 6th, which is tomorrow for you guys. So it's the first time he's given a date and said all this stuff as well to back it up. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
These rocks that are smaller are attracted to certain parts of the Earth, like Mexico. That just draws a lot of objects will be drawn directly to Mexico. There are 9 more spots in the Earth that will attract due to the magnetic field lines. Gravitational pull is going to attract things right to that area, and so those will be tracked as well.
So, Mike, let's a couple more questions here.
Talia, why I keep listening to Mike, because a lot of what he says comes true. Maybe not on the exact date he does, but it usually comes true. Like he'll say, keep an eye on a big earthquake around this time. Keep an eye on this volcano. Keep an eye on highways getting broken up because the lava's pushing up. And it all happens. So that's why I listen to Mike. I'm not keen on Paul. He's too much about the money. But I actually like Mike.
Not to change the subject much, but to ask a question here. I can't get into it. We have to be very careful when we start talking about pandemics. We just know, you said a lot of people are going to die in China. I've seen the reports here in the last 2 to 3 weeks. The numbers of people that are dying is outrageous. And I'm sure they're not getting all the information out. Are you concerned about this? Is this limited? Is this a major concern of yours?
Well, Pastor Paul, some very bad pathogens out there. Now, because of the pandemic, they're not going to release the information of any future pandemic like they did with COVID-19. They're not going to do it.
Because of what it does to the economy, or just because it
Yep. If they won't do it, it just sends everything in shambles. They found it was a lot of things that a lot of findings behind that.
Yeah.
And things did not work as usual. They're not going to release that information the same way. They're just not going to do it. So if they can,
are they going to just let it play itself out?
Yep.
Well, imagine if they never said anything about COVID-19.
Yep.
Right? People would have gotten sick. A lot of people would have died, but no one would have blamed anybody because they wouldn't know what it is.
Right.
It's very easy for those organizations to play dumb.
Yeah.
So this time they're not gonna do it like that.
No.
They're just not gonna. They may come up with a shot and say, "Hey, come get this brand new flu shot," or whatever the case is. But They're not going to announce it like that
No.
because they tried it. It didn't work, right?
No.
In my eyes, I would say this. They knew what was happening and they used it. They used a very real circumstance for several agendas, and it kind of backfired on them.
Yeah.
Right? They were the ones that, and they ended up choking each other out, and it didn't work too well. In times past, they would use the same type of incident to their advantage and to find out what the populace would do. I can tell you right now, the populace, they cannot predict what the populace is going to do very well. This will be seen with this governmental breakdown that we're going to have. I know I keep saying that, but it's very real. We're going to a new level of fighting.
Well, we're watching right now, and I know this has happened before, 1859, just before the Civil War. We're watching right now where we can't get a house, they can't agree, the Republican Party itself can't agree to choose one guy to be their Speaker of the House to move on with their agenda. And you feel the entire governmental breakdown going on in every agency and every legislative group and every branch of our government. There seems to be this melting down. Is that by design?
Well, you have individuals in there. A lot of them are they're spokesmen for power. Says the real power, right, in all governments are the civil servants.
Yes.
It's not the people that you see. It's the people that have been there for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
They know exactly what's happening. These talking heads couldn't do anything without those who sit in the background. So, but people have bought the fact that the people who they see on television are the people with power. That's not the case.
No.
The people the career individuals that have been there for a long time, they're the ones that dictate what the outcome of certain things are going to be. When something goes to the floor, right, there's always hidden components. It's almost like, they're told which way to vote. And what you're seeing now is part of a civil war taking place, where those individuals in the background are giving they're given the freedom, I guess you could say, to influence those talking heads a bit more. But then you have the talking heads who think they're more powerful than what they really are.
And then the people in the background. They actually
expect them. That's right. Expect these talking heads to get the boot, because now the populace is going to start calling for the removal of senators, for the removal of Congress members, and then that's going to be their car to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
So everything will seem reversed. It's going to be very confusing, but in truth, it's nothing more than a brand new system being forced in. You have to make the old system look like it's broken and beyond repair, so that everybody accepts the new system. And I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
If people heard enough, Pastor Paul, they're going to call for a new system, just like people will call to go to one of these places with barbed wire fence, with concertina up all over the place. They're going to say, "Put me in that safe place."
Yep.
Because lawlessness is building.
It's happening.
It's funny how people cannot see it. They can't see lawlessness building. And I hate to tell everybody, but everybody is armed to the teeth. I mean, these people are armed. There are militias out there. It's a lot of traffic, a lot of radio traffic from militias every single day. People are ready to move. And as President Trump has now entered back into the arena, you're going to see an ignition of some things, right? My advice to everybody would be this: make sure you're standing in the kingdom. Support what is godly.
Amen.
But don't count on whatever is right. That definition can be changed. They cannot change what is godliness. They can change right, because, Pastor, a lot of things that are right are wrong.
Yeah.
And many things that are wrong, they're calling right.
Right.
They're doing that right now. And this young populace, they believe it hook, line, and sinker. And some of the older folks like yourself, like myself, like some of your listeners out there, we're far and few in between. It's almost like even in the family unit, the parents are losing their seniority in the house.
Yes.
Right? The children have said, the children demand what job the parents get.
Yes.
By what they want. Because they demand what they want, the parents go get it.
Yep. They're not, the parents are no longer running it. The inmates are running the asylum now. And it's happening. And by the way, our society breakdown of the family All of this was by design. And so, you know, Mike, I'll be filming you soon for the webinar, which is concern about CERN, World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030, and the New World Order. And I don't know if you heard me say earlier, but Stan Dale, he did the New World Order. It was phenomenal. And we just heard from, I just filmed Doug Hagman on the World Economic Forum. Both of them are phenomenal presentations. And when we look at, and I don't even know what part you're going to touch. It don't matter if you hit any of the four or all of them. I can't wait to hear what yours is. But what you have been telling us is the breakdown of the system, the governmental breakdown, the economic breakdown, the societal breakdown, and it's by design, isn't it, Mike?
Yes.
This is by design.
Oh yes. In certain circles, Pascal, everything is going just as it should be.
That's the plan. Yeah.
Yep. Just as it. And I guess my amazement is this: because a lot of people really can't see it, they're not going to stop it. In fact, a lot of people's not knowing they support it. One of the worst things a Christian could ever do is support evil because they didn't know it was evil, right?
Right.
That'd be very bad. It's just like certain rights that people used to lobby for, and then they turn around and took those rights, put them into law in a very twisted way, and now then they legalize some things they shouldn't have legalized through people's what they thought was right, and so we have a lot of that going on right now. And this war has expanded. This war with Ukraine and Russia.
Tell us about that.
It shouldn't be called that. It should be called the Western Alliance and Russia. Russia's allies. They moved some pretty hefty things into the oceans. I mean, some really hefty things into the oceans.
Some kind of
both the USA and Russia. In fact, Russia deployed, just this morning, they deployed another. One of the most valuable ships that they had is deployed right now. Now, what does this ship do? This ship carries nuclear rounds, nuclear warheads on a hypersonic. That's what this does. And you can't shoot down a hypersonic, save for a laser. The only thing that can intercept that's a laser, which is what Israel and the USA have been working on for the last 3.5 years. I mean, they've really sunk some money into this. That's the only way you can intercept it. That system is not quite up to par yet, right? They also have subborne hypersonics that travel the same way certain classifications of ICBMs that travel. So we have some issues, and the way they're doing Putin right now, Putin is he is in the corner, right? Yeah. He's in the corner.
Yeah, Diane, I did see Greenland.
The propaganda is starting to really enrage him because the propaganda does not line up with the facts of what's happening out there. It's just not lining up.
You don't like that.
Everybody's going to see no, he didn't like that at all because of course, the propaganda, most of the news is covered by the West.
Yes.
You can't get Russian news, right? You can't get RT like you used to.
They
have effectively silenced Russia. And the Ukraine will say anything the USA wants it to say.
Yes,
that's what I was hoping everybody would see during this visitation.
Yeah.
That Zelensky will say anything
he wants to say.
That President Biden wants him to say. Yeah. It's not we're not talking about the people. We're talking about the leadership.
Right.
They're absolutely forming something right before people's eyes, and it will explode. It's going to. I give it a month and a half, Pascal, and it's really going to explode in a big way.
In other words, you've been saying that Ukraine's the staging ground for a much broader, bigger war between the West and Russia, the United States and its Western alliance, against Russia and its
you and Tracy, Diane,
subordinates. We'll throw Iran and Turkey or whoever else they want to throw in there. Maybe even China. I don't know. China's kind of the oddball because they're kind of like waiting to pick up the pieces after everybody.
Well, they gave the technical specifications to North Korea about what they were missing. So China's actively involved.
They are,
but nobody can do anything about China.
What about this?
Who could?
The North Korean drone today overtopped the presidential office of the South Koreans in Seoul. They got it into their airspace. They were over top. They had 5 drones, and one of them got completely over top the presidential office in South Korea. So South Korea.
You know what? That's also a strategy. One day, I would not be surprised, because have you noticed how North Korea does things and nobody intercepts what they fire? Have you noticed that?
I know. They let it happen.
They send a rocket into space. It orbits the Earth. Nobody shot it down. So that means they can shoot an ICBM right now, right? If they had that ICBM, if they had the warhead in some type, if they had that it's a cryo shell you can put over there so nobody can detect the radiation coming off of it. If they put that on there, if China gave that to them, if they put that on that warhead, they could launch an ICBM and nobody would know until it hit. No,
Wow.
and it's too late to shoot down an ICBM. Once it's coming down, it's too late. You can't do that. If something were to go over the USA, they couldn't shoot that down. That would affect the entirety of the USA based upon what the winds are blowing. You can't do that. You have to get it when it's going up in the air before it arcs and hits its, that explosion zone.
2 more questions, Mike. 2 more questions that people have been begging me to ask you. Have to ask you before we let you get away. One is the Pope Benedict, of course, funeral was today in Rome. I was stunned when I seen that his casket, instead of doing the funeral inside St. Peter's Basilica, they put it out on the stone steps. So people said, could it be? And wanted me to ask you, is this what you saw today?
No, he would have
Not the
said so.
Not the Pope.
No.
Not the Pope. And you know what's so strange, though? Because the stone steps were involved, right?
Yeah.
I'd say that would be more of a foreshadowing than the actual event. The actual event, stone steps. Let me paint a picture. There's going to be a person standing up. There's going to be 2 people or some folks to the right, to the left in uniforms that nobody really knows who they're designated with, right? They're not going to know who these folks are, but they're going to escort this individual down the steps in the middle of a raging crowd. There will be an armored vehicle to receive this individual. That's exactly what I saw. During this time, the streets are going to be full. People are going to be angry. They're going to be angry concerning the casket. It's going to be a major blow to strategies, to policies, to everything else, and everything changes at that point. Because what people don't know is this: if we get the wrong leader, right, our entire military is going to war not more than 72 hours after that person steps in power.
Wow.
There are too many things negotiated. Here's the position we're in. There are too many countries that are very delicate to talk with right now, right? There are countries that they have stopped from going to war against us several times. This is a part of politics not too many people talk about, but things have been averted. Very serious things have been averted. Lives have been saved. Now, this is through compromise. This is through negotiation, right? It's through compromise and negotiation. So what happens when we get somebody who won't compromise and who will not negotiate? We're going to have to fight. The fight is coming. It is coming. And when it starts, it will not stop. It's not going to end in one night. I even have a strong sense that somebody's going to smack us first. Somebody's going to get us first, Pastor Paul. I just have that strong sense that we have our guard down.
Yeah.
And if there are other countries they watch with an eagle's eye to see when is the best time to strike us. They talk to us all the time. That doesn't mean a thing. They're poised right now to strike us. All they want is to get through, right? They want a good opportunity to hit us. That's what they want. They don't care about anything else, and they're going to do it. People are at their breaking point. Alliances have totally broken down. People are realigning in the Middle East. Everything is realigning in the Middle East. We're going to know next week. Watch what comes out against Israel next week.
Let's
it
talk
was
about
a draft.
That. Okay, go ahead. What was it?
There are things drafted against Israel that when they come out next week, people are going to really, really scratch their heads on this and shake their heads on. They're going to say, no way. They're going to see things unfold before their eyes. And it's going to seem like nobody can do anything about it. But I hope that everybody understands that this one's not going to be a bluff. It's not going to be some broken, a broken idea, some ideology. This is going to turn it into policy quickly. It's going to be the way of the Middle East, and not too many people are going to like it. We're not going to see the USA stand beside Israel as close as people thought. We're just not going to see it.
Yeah, I believe that. I totally do. One last question before we let you go. Of course, Ben-Gvir, he's the Minister of National Security of Israel. He went to the Temple Mount to pray. First time a member of the Parliament cabinet, if you will, went up on the Temple Mount in over 5 years while in office. The United Nations Security Council called, slating to meet because of this. They're calling this the emergency meeting is coming. The two nations that called for it was the United Arab Emirates and China. Why is China? And you know, when you start looking
you just saw it, right?
Yeah.
The United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
There it is, right there. Keep your eyeball on those guys. Keep your eyes on them. And you remember when I said I do not trust Jordan?
Yes. Oh yeah, Jordan said it was a red line.
Right?
Jordan said
okay, all right.
Jordan said if he prays, Jordan said if this guy goes and prays up there, he crossed a red line. And he said it's not our fault if an intifada begins. Okay.
Well, now you see, because a few years ago, a lot of people, they like Jordan, and they asked me, they said, well, do you trust, who don't you like? I don't like Jordan. I don't trust Jordan.
You don't trust
because I know what Jordan's ultimate. Listen, these guys, it's just like the average person. When something catastrophic or a person is introduced in a high stress very quickly, right? You know what a person does? They go back home. And what that means is a person will go back to what makes them comfortable and what they actually belong to. While everything is relatively peaceful, people can venture out. When things get very stressful, everybody goes back home, meaning they go back to their foundational beliefs. They go back to the people they grew up with or felt comfortable with. They go back home. That's what that means. And when this takes place, Israel will have 0 allies in the Middle East.
Wow.
Everybody will be against Israel. And the USA, what are we going to do? It's almost like seeing a person that you're not really tied to go through something very bad. Now, you can either deal with their stress with them, or you can totally cut that person out of your life and say, well, that's their problem. I have my own issues here, right? That's exactly what we're going to see. This is the mentality we're going to see form.
You're going to see Israel abandoned. You're going to know what's worse than abandoned.
Fully abandoned. And by policy only will someone intercede, right? But people are soon to see that policy start to take shape, and they're not going to like it. People are not going to like it.
I'm will keep my eyes open. I'm going to be there in about 3 weeks. I've got a window. God told me, he said, I'm giving you a short window. You're going to take people in, you're going to get out. He said, there's some things going to happen. You got a window. And it sounds like the policies are going to start being revealed even before.
So God's told him he's got a specific window he can take advantage of.
Well, you know what? I do pray you have a safe passage. I'm sure you will, Pastor. Yeah. You're preserved. I know that you're preserved.
Hello, I'm Gary Stearman. Welcome to Prophecy Watchers. I have a very special guest today. He is an artist, he is a writer, and he is a student of all things that have or pertain to Israel in any way. His name, Daniel Wright. Daniel, it's a pleasure to be sitting next to you today because you and I work together and have for years.
We do. Thank you, Gary. Happy to be here.
And I say that because Daniel is a commercial artist, and he has designed many, many, many features of our magazine, The Prophecy Watcher, but more about that later. We're here to talk about a book that you have written called The Redemption Corridor. And when I read that title, or the first time I ever read the title, I said to myself, what does that mean? I mean, What's that all about? The redemption corridor. And I think we need to start by describing what you're calling the redemption corridor. And this, I think, casts a great deal of light on things biblical, things Israeli. I think of what's going on in Israel right now when I think of the redemption corridor. What's going to happen maybe in the near future in Israel? And I'm thinking to myself, what Daniel has written about may actually be enacted in new and different ways in the near future. So let's begin. What is the redemption corridor?
Well, I'd like to maybe read a definition. I can find it right here really quick. This is from the beginning of the book, but this is what it is. Redemption corridor is centered in Israel's biblical heartland, actually between Jerusalem and also in Jordan and Mount Nebo. Centered in Israel's biblical heartland, there is a narrow strip of terrain, which I believe is a chosen region above all others on the earth. This unique swath of territory was exclusively selected by the God of Israel for his own sovereign work of both implementing and commemorating the redemption of the human race. I call it the redemption corridor, mainly because it's involved in the redemption story and because it is a narrow stretch. It's like a corridor, it's like a pathway. And it seems to be starting on the east and kind of ending on the west. So it's a space where transition occurs.
But it's more than just ending in the west. It ends in a very special place in the west, right?
Yes, sir. At Jerusalem.
At Jerusalem.
Right, the Jerusalem Basin.
And so one part of the line would begin over in the east toward Mount Nebo. And then if you track to the west along that line, you'll eventually end up in Jerusalem.
Correct.
So what you have is an east-west corridor or strip of land along which certain very, very significant things have happened.
That's correct.
Speaking. In other words, do biblical events have a connection that I can visualize? And I never thought of it before. And suddenly here it is in a map. And by the way, your book is accompanied by a map which shows the corridor and the significant events along that corridor. And let's just talk about some of those right now. You mentioned Mount Nebo.
Sure. So I broke this rectangular stretch of territory into 4 chunks just for organizational purposes. They seem to happen in these clusters. They don't happen at the same time in history. And all of the stories that I put them together in what I call an inventory. Also at Mount Nebo, I talk about the events involving Moses's life, the last years of his life, his viewing of the land of Canaan from Nebo. There is a portion from the lifetime of Jeremiah the prophet. 2 Maccabees chapter 2 describes in 8 or 9 verses that Jeremiah was led by God in an oracle, a command, a message to spirit away the Ark of the Covenant, the long missing Ark of the Covenant over into the land where God had shown the promised land of Israel to Moses and hide them in a cave. So I articulate that as happening at Nebo. And then the last section at Nebo that I talk about is the transfiguration of our Lord Jesus. So, and I have some pretty in-depth descriptions as to why the transfiguration didn't happen at Mount Tabor up in the Sea of Galilee area. It didn't happen on the slopes of Mount Hermon, which is another theory, but that it happened very sensibly at Mount Nebo. That's where I believe it happened. So that's the first packet over there on the east.
Now, as you're talking, I'm thinking back to a trip to Israel and standing on the Temple Mount and looking to the east. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was looking along that line.
Yes, you were.
That
I was with you that day. Yes, sir.
The line centers the corridor as you move east and toward Mount Nebo.
Correct.
And so all along that line, very significant things have happened to Israel. It's fascinating when suddenly you come to consciousness about this. I was thinking about the children of Israel crossing over to get into Israel after the wilderness wandering, and they came back into the land, and that they're within that corridor, and they didn't.
Well, to be honest, they're in the corridor. Surely they occur. That site occurs on my map, but they are not. So there's a couple of axes that are important to keep in mind. A direct, using a modern compass, a modern digital compass instrument. There's a thing called cardinal east, and if you're standing right in front of the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, you hold this compass in your hand, directly east. Just imagine it's like going through the Mount of Olives eastward. Does not touch Mount Nebo. It's a little bit north of Mount Nebo. Is a little bit to the south, couple of degrees.
But it's still within that corridor.
Yes, sir. And then there's a northern axis that is the axis of the temple. So a center line, right from the most holy place eastward, out of the temple, aligned with the way the building is pointing. It goes out across over to Jordan, and it's way north of east by about 6.5 degrees. With regard to the children of Israel, that entire event, their crossing and where they crossed is actually pretty much quite a bit further north where they crossed the Jordan River. It's not on, I'm just saying it's not on the temple axis. Yes, sir. Yeah. But it's in the corridor. That's also why I ended up making it a corridor. You asked earlier, why'd you make it a corridor? Well, it's because the axes were limiting, and the events needed to be in a little bit wider space.
Now, if you follow the line from Mount Nebo, you'll be heading toward Jerusalem, and you'll pass the Dead Sea, and you'll be just at the north end of the Dead Sea.
That's correct.
Many tourists to Israel have driven a little highway that comes down from Jerusalem and goes around the north end of the Dead Sea. And I think a lot of tourists, have visited that area. And without realizing, we're in a sort of a wonderful corridor where many, many things have happened in the last 3,000 or 4,000 years. And as I read your book and look at this map, suddenly it dawns on me, our God is a God of method, a God of precision. And he's doing things that we have a very dim recognition of. And yet, when you see this, your mind begins to go, wait a minute, I have missed this all my life.
We're familiar with these stories. We are familiar with them. But the context of where, it isn't just that the stories occurred, it's where they occurred that have merit and make them interesting. Incidentally, just the northern edge of the Dead Sea that you're talking about that's right there is also where Qumran is. So where this enormous cache of Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1948 and in the early 1950s that have done what? They absolutely validated the Holy Scriptures. By, at that time in the 40s, by 1,000 years, they suddenly had manuscripts that virtually matched the Masoretic text. Suddenly 1,000 years older, and they're found in this corridor.
In the Redemption Corridor.
In the Redemption Corridor, yes.
Now, you could have called it the Sacred Corridor. You could have called it a number of different things, but you chose to call it the Redemption Corridor. And how did you come up with that title?
Well, that's a good question, and I thought about it a lot. There were a number of titles that I considered, but I think that the main thing I was trying to point out, because this is not really a Christian book. It's not even a Jewish book. It's actually for all people. I believe the redemption that God is orchestrating on the earth is for all people. Obviously it is. The Jews look at it through a different lens than the Christians look at it through, but God is above those views. My intent is that for the Christian, I want to encourage them and bless them with this knowledge that there is this so-called Old Testament connection, but for the Jewish reader, I wanted to make certain that they understood that the whole concept of redemption that is wrought in Jesus of Nazareth is tied to a pattern that was revealed to Moses.
Now we're going to pause here, and I want to say we're talking to Daniel Wright, and if you've seen The Prophecy Watcher and noticed the beautiful design work, the covers, the design on the inside of the magazine, very pleasing. Daniel Wright is our artist, and he does a marvelous job. Let's pause for a moment, and I'll tell you how you can get a magazine for yourself. The Prophecy Watcher.
Everything that we're doing at Prophecy Watchers is vital because Bible prophecy is coming to pass right before our eyes. And it has never been more important for believers to understand what the Bible says about the days that we are living in. In case you haven't noticed, the whole world is spinning out of control, but we are not surprised because many of the things taking place were prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago. That's why we want to offer you a very special subscription to our magazine, The Prophecy Watcher, that will keep you on the cutting edge of Bible prophecy. Stay informed on prophetic world events. Follow the nuclear threats from Russia and Iran, China's march to world domination, the likelihood of another global pandemic, the rise of artificial intelligence and transhumanism, war in the Middle East, the UFO phenomenon, and the latest technology preparing the world for the mark of the beast. The Prophecy Watcher magazine features articles from leading prophecy experts like Gary Stearman, Mondo Gonzalez, Thomas Ice, Randall Price, L.A. Marzulli, Bill Salas, and many others. With your gift of $50 or more to support the worldwide outreach of Prophecy Watchers, you will receive 12 issues of the magazine in either print or digital format. You will also receive 10 bonus DVDs that feature in-depth teaching on the ancient book of Enoch, heaven and the New Jerusalem, the biblical case for the rapture, a look at how God put the
treasures were kept, and I don't think all those treasures have been found.
I agree. There's more.
And along this corridor, and we're moving now toward Jerusalem. So what happens as we get closer?
Well, as we climb up to Jerusalem, there's a number of things that occur. It's actually the third section in my table of contents. I call it the Judah Wilderness Ascent. So I mentioned Qumran there. There's a small section on just the traversing up to Jerusalem, the whole idea of going up to Jerusalem. Right. And so we know in the New Testament there's a story where shortly after, actually immediately after Jesus is baptized, he is sent by the Spirit into the wilderness.
Yes.
Well, this wilderness that he's sent into is, I think, southwest of Jericho, and it's in this corridor. So he spends about 40 days out there, and he comes in contact with the tempter. Satan comes to him and tempts him. Well, these events occur in this redemption corridor, and it's interesting to me the response that Jesus had to the devil every time he's harassed. He quotes from the book of Deuteronomy, and all of his answers to him are from Deuteronomy, the law of Moses. So, and then there is the whole, and this is very, very, very complicated. There's a number of pages describing it. There's the annual Day of Atonement, which occurs, and part of the Day of Atonement ritual, which was revealed to Moses back in the wilderness days, where they take a goat that has had all the sins of the people laid upon it, and it is escorted out of the camp, out of the city, and out into the wilderness to be left to perish alone in the wilderness. And this is what when Jesus was out there. They're in the same location. I'm not saying they were in the same location at the same time, but positionally it's in the same location, and I believe that is not accidental.
Now I'm looking at the map that comes with the redemption corridor, and we're moving along this line, and you call it the temple axis line.
Yes,
and
sir.
as we move from east to west, we find ourselves coming across the very famous geographical area involving a mountain, a valley, and then the Temple Mount. And so many biblical things have happened along that line, and it's just the way you've got it laid out. It suddenly comes to life. It's marvelous. So where are we now?
Well, the fourth section, I call it the land of Moriah and Jerusalem. And so the thing is, the events are important, but they didn't happen at the same time in history. So you've got the point of time where Abram meets Melchizedek.
Yes.
That happens in the corridor. There is the covenant of the pieces, which is the covenant that God makes with Abram, where he divides some animals opposite one another. I have a diagram in the book that explains that this was an east to west division of these animal parts. That's Genesis 15. Genesis 22, the binding of Isaac, which is where Isaac almost is sacrificed by his father.
I just have to interrupt because you've touched a spot that I found most interesting in your book, and that is the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant.
Yes, sir.
Laying out the pieces of sacrifices and walking down between those pieces. The Lord actually walks, if you will, along a particular line to ratify that covenant.
Yes, sir.
And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I'm thinking, wow, this has an incredible spatial relationship with what later became the Temple Mount.
Yes, sir.
And I'd never thought of that before, but here it is on the map.
Yes, sir.
And
it is fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It's incredible. And then the almost sacrifice of Isaac by Abram. There's disagreement. Okay, let's be honest. There's disagreement amongst theologians, particularly the Jewish people. They will tell you that God had Abram almost sacrifice his son on traditional Mount Moriah, essentially where the Dome of the Rock is today.
Yes.
I believe that is not correct. That's certainly not what the Bible says. The Bible never says that Abram sacrificed or almost sacrificed his son on Mount Moriah. It's not in the Bible. What's in the Bible is that God led Abram and Isaac to Haaretz HaMoriah, to the land of Moriah. Go to the land of Moriah, he tells him, and sacrifice your son Isaac there on a mountain that I will show you. The scriptures in Genesis 22 also explain clearly that this mountain could be seen from the distance. You can't see the low hill that is the Temple Mount today. In the time of Abraham, you couldn't see it from afar, but you could see the Mount of Olives. And I believe that it happened on the Mount of Olives.
Now let's take a trip to the Temple Mount. And you've been there many times. And you stand above the eastern gate and you look out over a parapet, a wall toward the east. And what are you looking at when you look across?
Well, you're looking across the Kidron Valley and you're looking at the rising western-facing slope of the Mount of Olives.
Indeed. Now, the Mount of Olives is incredibly significant in a biblical scenario. So many things have happened.
And will happen.
And will happen.
Right.
And so you're standing above the eastern gate. You're looking east. Actually, what you're doing is looking along that redemption corridor. And significant things have happened along that corridor.
That's correct.
And suddenly you realize you're looking at this and you're thinking, our God is a great God. Our God has laid things out in such a way that we are stupefied by his command.
Absolutely.
Of humanity and of history. It's just amazing.
Within the pattern of Moses, within the tabernacle, within the most holy place, the Ark of the Covenant is placed between the cherubim. The cherubim is essentially the cover of the ark, and this cover is a chair. I mean, it's not designed as a chair in that we're sitting in chairs now, but it's the throne of God, and God is seated on this chair, but God's facing a particular direction. Behind him is a wall. To the north is a wall. To the south is a wall. It's open to the east. There is a veil, but it's open to the east. So the Almighty God who created heaven and earth and time and space and all of history told Moses, I will meet with you here above the cover of the ark. And so the ark is essentially his throne on earth. And before him, out in front, eastward, is all the temple architecture, all this tabernacle architecture. The Mount of Olives, when we're at Jerusalem, wasn't always in Jerusalem, and everything that's happening redemption-wise is out in front of him.
Wow. Let's pause just for a moment, and we have this book that we'd love for you to see, and we're going to tell you now how you can get the book.
The land of Israel is a special place. The Bible tells us it's God's favorite place on earth. Perhaps it's due to the fact that the whole temple eastern gate towards the Mount of Olives. Daniel's ideas are visualized with an elaborate, detailed map of the redemption corridor. It will enable you to see things as God sees them from an aerial perspective and see what God has planned for the future. Daniel's book and his corresponding map are available for your gift of $25 or more to Prophecy Watchers, with shipping included anywhere in the USA. Just call the toll-free number you see on your screen any time of the day or night. Yourself to 3 days of great .com, where you can register for the 3-day event online. Thank you for your faithful support of this ministry. We believe that Jesus is coming soon, and we want to make sure that all of you join us in our heavenly home.
At this point, we're moving toward the end of the program, and suddenly I'm looking at the clock and I'm saying, we're running out of time, and we're just getting to the good part, because we talked about the Ark of the Covenant. Well,
yes, sir.
And the tabernacle before that, and the temple. But I have never seen anybody else put this together in the way that you have. And I think it's because of that artistic way that you have of looking at life. You see things as bracketed by patterns and contrasts and so forth. And you see that, and now you have kind of put it on paper so that we can all see it. I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Gary. I'm glad you like it. I mean, it's
so. How can we conclude in the next minute or so for somebody who is interested in the redemption corridor?
The thing that I also, sometimes when you're thinking about how to organize anything or do anything, you want to begin with the end in mind. And I think that the end of this really is heaven and the New Jerusalem. And for those of us who have the view that we have about the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. I mean, there's the entire idea of moving towards a heavenly world where there is peace and where there's safety and where God is present. And when I think about the New Jerusalem, particularly as it's described in Revelation 21 and 22, it's like the goal of history, the goal of human life and history. And this pattern expands and extrapolates and enlarges up into what is the New Jerusalem eventually. I'm not talking about my book. I'm talking about the pattern that God gave Moses in a ragged desert environment, extrapolates through time, through the end of Revelation 21 and 22, to be a heavenly city that's 12,000 furlongs by 12,000 furlongs. It's actually the Holy of Holies, extrapolated up to be an enormous heavenly city. And this pattern is, I think, almost like the main street in it.
With God, there are no accidents.
No, there's not.
And as we talked about the tabernacle earlier, we talked about how it faces to the east. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder why. Well, now I think I have a little better idea. And I want to say thanks to Daniel Wright, and keep it up. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you again soon.
I'll do it.
Okay, guys, I'm out too. See you tomorrow.